Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the regular January meeting of the Concord Zoning Board of Adjustment. We will follow our usual procedure this evening, which is to say we will call the cases on the agenda. We will make one adjustment to that, which is that we're going to move one case to the top, which is not currently at the top, for the convenience of a couple of board members who will be sitting in for those of us who are going to recuse ourselves from that case, and that's case number 4.4, Michael G. and Eileen Gaffrere. Otherwise, we will take the cases in the order in which they appear in the agenda. We will ask the appellant to step forward and testify, be sworn in, have a seat at the chairs to my right, and testify as to anything they would like us to hear. We generally request that, if at all possible, they confine that testimony to a 10-minute interval. After the appellant has concluded their testimony, we will solicit testimony from anyone in the audience who is in favor of the appeal, followed by anyone in the audience who is in opposition to the appeal. We generally request that those people confine themselves to a 5-minute interval. Following that, we will check in with code enforcement to see if there are any comments that they would like to offer. And then, if any testimony has been offered that appears to justify factual clarification, the appellant will have the opportunity to provide that clarification, not new arguments, prior to our concluding the public hearing portion of the testimony. At that point, normally the board will act on each case prior to moving on to the next one. So the first case this evening will be, as I said, case 4.4, Michael G. and Eileen Gaffrere, and Mr. Monahan will chair the meeting. Mr. Wallner and I will recuse ourselves.
You could just state why the purpose for your recusal.
Conflict of interest.
And I've had discussions with the applicant about the case.
So, who's sitting?
Okay, yeah, Mike, I'm going to read the description of the case, and then I'll swear you in, and then we can get started. Okay? Sure. So open the hearing on case 4.4. Michael G. and Ellen M. Gaffrere request approval for variance from section 28-4-1C, dimensional standard maximum lot coverage, to allow for 78.3% lot coverage, where 50% is the maximum allowed at tax map lot number 7322Z51, addressed as 11 Summit Street in the neighborhood residential RN district, which is referenced in the ZBA code 0241-, the case is 0241-024. So the applicant is here. Mr. Gaffrere, do you swear to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Great, thanks. Can you summarize what you're asking us to do this evening?
Well, some of you may recall I was before the board in July, looking for setback variances and lot coverage variances for the two properties that I own, 11 Summit Street, and it's adjoining, and it's a abutting property, 12 Tohoto Street. They're back to back. I thought everything was covered at that hearing. I got the variances that I requested, that I was requesting for a lot line adjustment to do a minor subdivision, and it turns out that there may have been some clerical error made along the way somewhere, and the lot coverage exceeding the 50% requirement was not noticed, even though it was requested in my original filing with the board. Oh. So I'm here to, I believe, to correct that deficiency, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. I mean, I went over everything I needed to go over the last time to get the variances in the first place to make the lot line correction. If anybody has any problems with the presentation that I made then or what's before the board now, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a question.
Any questions from the board?
Why does the plan say the lot coverage is 55.7% and the agenda says 78.3%?
It says that because he has subsequently submitted his lot line adjustment application, and the plat that is submitted with that shows 78% coverage.
Oh, okay.
So I noticed it as that.
Okay.
So as long as the notice is correct, then we're in good standing, right?
Correct.
So the map, you're talking about the hand-drawn map, not the
Yeah.
stamped plan. Okay.
Is there a stamp plan?
I don't see one either, but I think that's what code enforcement referenced, right?
Correct.
Yep, okay.
Okay, any other questions from the board?
So there's no substantive change to your
No
overall?
substantive change whatsoever, there's no change in use, there's no new buildings, there's no change at all involved with this. It's just adjusting the line between the two properties that I own on 12 Tohoto and 11 Summit.
Okay.
And it's to enable, in the long run, it's to enable me to convey the 11 Summit Street property out. But in order to do that appropriately, I need to make the lot line adjustment.
May I,
Yeah.
just to refresh my memory is, the reasoning for the overall project was to consolidate two lots that you own into?
No.
Okay, so can you just refresh my memory on what the
Yeah,
overall reasoning was briefly?
I was here in the fall of 2023 as well.
Yeah.
And at that time, I got I asked for variances and lot line adjustments to allow me to build a garage, which basically not covered, but affected both of the properties, and I needed to carve off part of 11 Summit Street to accommodate the garage, which is at 12 Tohoto Street. So it's at the back of 12 Tohoto Street, which I have a right-of-way to approach from Summit Street.
Oh, right.
That was what I asked for at the time, and since my plans have changed somewhat, and the existing property line between 12 Tohoto Street, where I've lived for 47 years, and 11 Summit Street is literally 6 feet behind my house. And there's 20 feet between my property line and the back of 11 Summit Street. In fact, what I described to the board when I was here in July was that that piece of property between the two houses, for as long as I've lived in this house, in the house at 12 Tohoto Street, has been treated as my backyard. And with the total consent and cooperation of the neighbor, I've maintained the property, I've built a sidewalk across the property, I've planted flower beds on the property, I've maintained it for the whole 47 years that I've lived there. And what I want to do is make sure that if I am going to convey out 11 Summit Street, I don't convey out that part that I've treated as my yard. I don't want somebody buying 11 Summit Street and building a fence 6 feet behind my house, which is where the current property line is. That's why I'm asking the board to grant a variance to allow the property line to be not 6 feet behind the 12 Tohoto Street property, but 6 feet behind the 11 Summit Street property. That's the crux of it.
So it's essentially going to increase the lot coverage on one lot and reduce on the other, but the total lot coverage, accounting for both lots, is the same. There's no new.
No change at all, and there's no change whatsoever in the footprint of 11 Summit Street, nor is there any change in the footprint of 12 Tohoto Street, except for the fact that there's now a garage, which was allowed by variance back in 2023.
Okay, other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is anybody here who wishes to testify in support of the application? And is there anybody here who wishes to testify in opposition to the application? Okay, any comments from planning staff?
No, none at this time.
Okay. We'll start with Mr. Winters. Do you have anything to talk to us about?
Well, I think we can refer back to our reasoning when we granted the variance. I don't know if I can't remember the exact 6 months ago or so. It's the same concept. I think I can't recall if he mentioned lot coverage at the time, but it's essentially the same reasoning applies, that there's no change in the overall usage between the two lots. He owns both of them. This is just sort of memorializing in some way what the historical division has been between these two properties. So I think for that reason it's appropriate.
Okay. Mr. Davis?
You wanted an odd number, right?
It's okay.
Okay, go with even.
But I'm trusting you that you won't give me a tie.
You can't commit to that.
Right. Well, should it come to that, I think we'll deal with it, but I don't think, well, should it come to that? Ms. Spector-Morgan.
I agree with Andrew.
Okay,
So,
Yeah, same.
great. Is there a motion?
I would move to approve the variance on the basis that this would not be contrary to the public interest or the spirit of the ordinance, because it would not alter the essential character of the neighborhood, given that there are no actual changes happening to the property. There will be no diminution of surrounding property values, again, because it is merely memorializing what is already there. Substantial justice will be done because there will be no harm to the public and all gain to the applicant. And the special circumstances are that the situation already exists on the ground and we're just merely moving property lines. And therefore, there is an unnecessary hardship if the variance is denied.
Great, thanks. Is there a second?
I second.
Second by Mr. Winters. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
The matter passes 4-0.
Do you want us to?
Can you include in that you accept the applicant's findings also?
I accept the applicant's findings also.
We're out of practice.
It's a new thing.
Yeah, it's a new thing.
We're not.
Thanks, Jeff.
Uh-oh.
Did you steal my agenda?
Yeah. Did you, is mine here?
That's my scrap paper.
I can live without. Mine is somewhere.
We can share.
I'm good.
The next case is case 4.1, Andrew J. Tyne, on behalf of 1115 Pierce Street LLC, requests approval for a special exception for a rooming house per section 2824JB, Table of Principal Uses, residential, at tax map lot 7441Z, 59, addressed as 1115 Pierce Street in the downtown residential RD district. Gentlemen,
Hi, how are you?
good. Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but?
Yes, I do.
Would you identify yourselves for the record as you testify and let us know why you feel the variance is justified?
Sure, Andrew Tyne for the applicant, 11 to 15 Pierce Street LLC, and with me is Justin Etling, one of the managers of the LLC. So this is a property that's being used as a sober recovery home, so it's for people that are disabled, that are in recovery from substance use. It's been being used for that purpose for a while. About how long? A year. But the city approached the applicant and said that they should apply for a rooming house license. So they're here today looking for that rooming house license to basically do what the city has asked for and to be compliant. It's not really a rooming house because it's a sober recovery home and it's different. People share the whole house. There's rules. You know, people practice abstinence. They have a purpose there, which is different than that of people who typically are residing in a rooming house, which they're going there to live alone and, you know, carry on with their daily affairs, whereas people in a sober living environment like this are looking for the support of others and to attend house meetings and to participate in proactive recovery, practice abstinence while they're living there. So it's a different type of environment community than a rooming house, but that all exists under the code, which is close to this type of use. So a rooming house is close to, I guess, a sober house. So we're looking for a special exception to operate this two-family home, which is 4 bedrooms and 4 bedrooms with 6 parking spots, as a sober recovery home. I've outlined in my papers why a special exception is appropriate, but frankly, a reasonable accommodation under federal law is probably more applicable to this set of circumstances. So under federal law, the ADA and the Fair Housing Act, people in recovery from substance use are considered disabled. And because of that, they're entitled to certain relief under the law, accommodations, to allow them to have access to housing. And the accommodation that they're seeking in this regard from this board is access to housing to use this property for purposes of a recovery residence. So they're looking for relief, which, from this board, which may be necessary to allow them to continue to operate this property as a sober recovery home for people in recovery from substance abuse. The standard for reasonable accommodation under federal law and the ADA is entirely different than the variance criteria. Because under federal law, it says this board should provide a reasonable accommodation to allow these individuals to use this property for recovery residents to further their recovery if it would not impose an undue financial or administrative burden on the city, and it's not fundamentally, would not fundamentally alter the city's zoning scheme. So is it going to impose some sort of financial undue administrative burden upon the city? I mean, we would suggest not. If it's used as a rooming house or just a two-family with 8 people per unit or 5 people per unit, it's going to have the same types of burdens upon the city in terms of terms of resources and things of that nature, the sewer, the water, et cetera, the police, the fire, the parking. And with respect to fundamentally alter the city's zoning scheme or purpose, we don't think that this use would do that, because the city allows by special exception a rooming house. And a rooming house has the same type of impact upon a neighborhood as does a sober living environment. Really, a sober living environment we think is a more it's more like a more family environment than a rooming house. So we think it's actually more akin to family living. But in terms of comparative, people might look at it as a rooming house, and therefore it's not inconsistent with what is allowed by the city in this zone. So we don't think there's an inconsistency by this use continue to exist at this property. That's all I have to say.
Are you asking us to rule that, are you essentially making 2 requests? One, that we rule that the special exception is not necessary, and if we rule that it is, that we grant the special exception, or are you just asking for the special exception?
The first one.
You are, okay.
Yeah, we're asking for reasonable accommodation, and if you don't believe that that's appropriate, then we're looking for a special exception.
Okay.
Because I think a reasonable accommodation is a more appropriate standard for these individuals, since they have the benefit of federal law.
Ms. Skinner, could you give us the benefit of your thoughts on this?
Well, that's interesting. And I'm actually glad that Mr. John Conforti is here, because this has gone back and forth between us and our legal team. So I'm going to let him answer that question, because it's really a legal question.
Swear to tell the truth and nothing but.
I do.
Would you identify yourself for the record, please?
John Conforti, Deputy City Solicitor.
What would you like us to know?
So, Mr. Chair, what's before the board right now is the request for the special exception. I know that Mr. Tynes made an alternative argument that he's entitled to carry on the activities or his client is entitled to carry on the activities at that facility under the ADA and Fair Housing Act. I think whether there's whether that would be a reasonable accommodation would require, I think, a lot more analysis that is not before this board right now. And as I understood it, when we spoke with planning, the intent was for the applicant to go forward with requesting the special exception, which is permitted in this zone. The question of whether the city in general would need to make a reasonable accommodation if, for example, the special exception was not permitted would be something that we'd have to take back administratively with staff and then engage in an interactive process with the applicant at that point in time. So my opinion is that right now what's before the board is the special exception, and that was certainly what I understood from the application itself.
Very good.
And
Yes.
that,
Oh, go ahead.
I'll add a couple of things. They did apply for a special exception.
Right.
They submitted the application for a special exception. That was the application applied for online. And I'll add 2 other things. I'll just reiterate what I mentioned in the staff memo, in that there is no information provided regarding off-street parking. There is a requirement for off-street parking, so they will have to show that as part of their site plan review, which they will have to do subsequent to this approval, because they are making a conversion to a certain number of rooms, and that triggers major site plan approval. So once the special exception is approved, they will need to apply for major site plan approval for the planning board to review compliance with the site plan regulations.
Very good, thank you. Typically, when the board is asked to rule on whether or not an appeal is necessary, we don't conduct the entire hearing before we do that. We generally will consider that an administrative issue amongst ourselves. So I'm going to poll the board on this one. What I'm hearing Mr. Conforti say, and I'm inclined to think it's true, is that the question of whether or not this constitutes a reasonable accommodation is beyond our competence. Is that the concurrence of the board?
I agree.
I have a question about that, though. Go ahead, Andrew.
Sure.
I don't think it's beyond our competence necessarily, but I do agree we haven't been given enough analysis to make that decision tonight. So I think if we maybe had the benefit of legal counsel and recessed it, we could really dive into that, but I'd be prepared to move forward with the special exception on its own tonight. I kind of heard in the presentation almost two distinct reasons why they think they don't need an exception. One being that it's a room, that it's not a rooming house, although he kind of came around to saying, but it's comparable enough that we should apply that standard. So I don't think they're really pressing that point. And then the second is that it's the ADA and the FHA gives special deference to disabled individuals, which I'm sure is true, but I don't think that means they wouldn't need a special exception. I think what that might mean is that we would have to take that into account when deciding the special exception. But I don't think it could completely exempt them.
I'm inclined to agree with you. In my line of work, the ADA, the reasonable accommodation has to do with physical circumstances in a building, for example, but it doesn't necessarily excuse you from complying with the building codes or other regulations. So my preference, and I'll poll the board, as I said, is to move forward with the special exception consideration as we normally would, complete the hearing, and to set aside the question of whether or not the ADA nullifies the need for it.
Chris, as long as we have our new deputy
City solicitor.
city solicitor, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
So it strikes me the question about whether or not the city is providing reasonable accommodations is something that this doesn't seem like the most appropriate forum to decide that, is my sense, but I'm wondering what is the most appropriate forum for that decision?
Well, I would agree with that. I mean, that issue hasn't been briefed yet. Again, the property owner is the one who's bringing this forward, not the disabled individuals at this point in time.
Yeah.
So, again, a determination with city planning staff, code staff, to see what accommodations might be necessary or might be required under the FHA. We have not addressed those with the applicant, again, because we knew that the applicant had a special exception avenue, and so again, what we understood was before the board is a special exception application tonight.
Right. There is a chance, though, that if a special exception is not granted, then the applicant, on behalf of the person with the disability, may challenge that in the appropriate forum.
We would certainly engage with them at that point in time.
Yes. Okay. And then I have a question for the applicant, if we're at that point.
Sure.
And may I ask a question of council as well?
Yeah.
Would you say that, given the overlying implications of the FHA and the ADA, it is likewise inappropriate for this board to take into consideration the individuals who will be occupying the rooming house, and that we should review this solely as a rooming house?
I would say that for tonight, what's before this board is a special exception application for a rooming house.
Thank
Yes.
Your question?
Well, given that, probably shouldn't ask the question, because I wanted to get a better understanding of the activities at the sober living facility. Are there any treatment services or anything you're billing for outside of, you're shaking two different directions, so.
Sorry,
Yeah.
He's trying to hear, I'm saying
Oh,
no.
okay. Yeah, so for the residents that are at the property, is your business or any business you're associated with providing billable services
we're providing no billable services at the housing, no.
at the housing, but for the individuals that live there, are you providing?
Individuals at the facility, some individuals at the facility do receive treatment services, but not at the facility.
Right,
They
but
live
from your
there.
business, do they?
Not provided by
No.
the business.
No, okay,
No.
from other providers?
Yes.
Yeah, good, okay.
Mr. Tyne, do you have any objection to our considering the special exception?
I have no objection to consideration of the special exception. I mean, I thought my papers were very clear that we're also seeking a reasonable accommodation because that's what they say. So I understand the city may not be prepared to move forward on that as of right now because they haven't done their due diligence or engaged in an interactive process, which Fair Housing Act and the ADA encourage. I know my client would like to work with the city, so if that's the best approach is to discuss a reasonable accommodation, if it's necessary, if this board denies the relief for a special exception, then, we will do that. We will go that route if that's, the best way to work with the city at this point in time.
Very good. Is there anything else you'd like us to know on the subject of the special exception?
I think you should grant it.
I picked up on that.
So, which means you would like us to go forward with the special exception request?
Sure.
All right.
Thank you.
We will do that. Thank you, gentlemen. That's all.
Oh, we should leave.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there anyone here who would like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Is there anyone here who would like to be heard in opposition to it? Please come forward. I see a hand. Swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but.
I do.
May we have your name, please?
My name is Maggie Keene,
And your address?
9 Pierce Street.
Did you have the opportunity to sign in on the sign-in sheet?
I did, sir.
Okay, great, thanks.
So I prepared a statement. It's a little long. I promise I'll keep it under 5 minutes.
That's all we ask.
I live at 9 Pierce Street with my family, and I am a direct abutter to 1115 Pierce Street. In fact, I am so close to 1115 Pierce Street that I can stand at my kitchen table and see into their kitchen. It's a little weird. I strongly oppose granting the requested special exemption for this property. I first should put on record the elephant in the room, and that is that this property has knowingly been running a rooming house for over a year without complying with the city and with the zoning ordinance. And the zoning board knew that. There's a number of instances where the zoning board has been notified that a rooming house has been running out of this property.
Wait, sorry, just for clarification, we're the zoning board.
Yes, I know.
Oh,
It's code enforcement that you're
Code
talking
enforcement.
oh, okay.
Yes.
about. We're innocent. Totally innocent.
We didn't.
So, to understand my strong opposition, I wish to provide a timeline for the record. 1115 Pierce Street was sold on 7/5/2023 to the current owners. Almost immediately, the property became a revolving door of people, both men and women, and there was constant vehicle and foot traffic, police interaction, and late night noise, not to mention the sudden appearance of cigarettes and trash on my property that had never occurred before. In fact, it got so bad that in the fall of 2023, I called the city and spoke with someone and discussed at length my concerns, flagged the current ZBA restrictions for a rooming house, and asked several questions. I was told that they would get the answers to my questions and follow up with me. I left 2 additional messages and never received a response. These issues continued and escalated, and in the spring of 2024, our neighborhood had had enough, and several citizens, including myself, submitted complaints through the city portal. My complaint on 3/14 reads as follows. 1115 Pierce Street is a duplex that was purchased by 1115 Pierce Street LLC on July 5th, 2023. Since that time, a sober house has been run out of both sides of the property. The city was contacted about this with concerns about increased police presence and whether the property met zoning requirements related to a rooming house. Several questions were asked about whether the property owner would be required to file a zoning variance and notify abutters. A response was never received. Since July, there have been nearly weekly visits with fire and rescue to the property. My yard, which abuts the property, often has cigarette butts tossed into it, as well as alcohol cans, and there is constant late-night traffic on both sides of the building. The constant presence of police and fire and rescue is unacceptable in a residential neighborhood full of small children, and I have serious concerns about whether the individuals residing there have been properly screened for the safety of neighborhood children. I am also concerned that as the weather gets warmer, the rowdiness will only increase. On May 6, 2024, a public hearing was held for a special exemption on 24 Pierce Street. The residents strongly opposed that special exemption request, and the ZBA approved the application despite the numerous concerns of the neighbors. They allowed a maximum of 6 individuals, which was the number that was requested by the applicant. During this meeting, 1115 Pierce Street was also discussed, with the ZBA indicating that the owner was going another direction. It is unclear what that direction was. However, the issues expressed by the residents at the meeting continued. Around Christmas, we received notice of tonight's agenda. The notice contained no additional information about the 1115 Pierce Street application. I obtained that information on the website, on the city website. However, as an abutter, it's my understanding that the applicant was supposed to provide information to me. I want to put on record that this application was submitted in April 2024. Why is it now, only now, that it's being placed on the agenda? I strongly oppose allowing 1115 Pierce Street to be granted a special exemption for a rooming house. 16 individuals is a lot of people. I live next to this property. There's no yard, there's minimal parking. That's a lot of people in and out of the property every day. There's constant traffic congestion around the house. A van comes several times a day, sometimes parking on the sidewalk, and there is just minimal parking in general. People are in and out of the property at all hours. This has a direct impact on my family's peaceful enjoyment of our home and create congestion in our neighborhood. The request does in fact create a hazard to health, safety, and general welfare of the public, and its use is detrimental to the neighborhood. There is no screening that we are aware of related to the residents of the rooming house. Are they violent individuals? Are they felons? Do they have prior sex offense convictions? Are they drug tested? The rooming house is detrimental to the neighborhood as it will impact property values of the surrounding homes. Residents purchase property in this neighborhood with the expectation that it would have single-family homes and duplexes. If we wanted to live near sober living, apartment buildings, and rooming homes, we would have purchased property near there. Allowing 16 people to reside in this duplex is not keeping with the spirit of the neighborhood. These individuals are not a family, nor do they function that way. If anything, they're similar to a fraternity. 16 people in this property is like living next to a crowded apartment building. I ask the city to deny this request.
Questions from the board?
I think you said at the beginning, when did the property turn over?
The property was purchased July 5th, 2023.
So I don't understand your reference as the weather gets warmer. It's going to
So
get worse.
my
Gone through a couple
complaint
seasons.
through the portal was submitted in March of 2024. So at the time I was referencing it's early spring and it's going to get warmer. But I had previously contacted the city about this in the fall of 2023.
Got it, okay, right.
Did I understand you to say that the police and fire department are frequent visitors?
Yes, less so in the last several months, but it was a near weekly occurrence with fire and rescue due to overdoses and inappropriate behavior.
Very good. Other questions from the board? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard? Please come forward. Good evening, Mr. Schweiger.
Good evening, members of the board.
Swear to tell the truth and nothing but?
Yes, I do.
Would you identify yourself for the record, please?
I am Roy Schweiker. I'm not in a butter.
What's your address?
12 Chapel Street. And I'm here because I think the city needs more rooming houses, and I think it needs more sober facilities. But I don't happen to like this particular plan. I think it's too, how can I say, too much on one lot. I looked at the assessment. I think there's only officially 5 bedrooms in that place. So, you know, they can take a room and call it a bedroom that wasn't before, but, you know, you're just putting a lot of people in. As far as the cars, there may be 6 spaces, but there's not 6 spaces you can get in and out to the way the rules like it. You know, they'd have to shift the cars around. So, in effect, you're causing, you know, a lot of cars on the street. I don't know how many people out of this 16 people have cars, but, you know, certainly you're putting a lot more cars on the street. You're putting too many people in a place that, you know, wouldn't have that many people. This is a duplex. You might have, you know, say 4 people per side. That's only 8. So I don't think you should grant it for the, you know, full 16 people. I think if you're going to approve this on the basis this is a desirable thing, you need to limit the number of people, you know, fewer rooms. I mean, there's a 10 limit for any rooming house, so I think you could certainly cut down to that. And, you know, maybe you can get some testimony from the applicant about how many of these people have cars, but I think with the number of visitors and so forth, you know, there should certainly be as many spaces as cars are, you know, going to be parked there. I mean, yes, the residents turn over, so you don't know for sure who they are, but they may have a flavor for what % of their clients have cars. So anyway, that's why I'm opposed to this particular number. Thank you.
Thanks,
Any
Ryan.
questions? Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard? Any comments from code enforcement?
Yes, thank you. As stated in the staff memo, a couple of things. One, rooming house in the portion of the code, not in the definition, but in the supplemental standards, only allows a maximum of 10 people. So there cannot be more than 10 people in that entire structure as tenants of the rooming house. That's over and above the resident, you know, the resident manager, whomever. And then regarding parking, as I stated previously, there is a parking requirement for a rooming house, and it's 2 spaces per room. That's a total of 10 spaces. That parking has to be on the site. So they did not present any information showing how they're meeting that parking requirement. If they cannot meet the parking requirement, they will have to come back and ask for a waiver, and they'll have to get that granted before they apply for major site plan review application.
But is the parking issue something, and the fact that it's alleged they have more than 10 people living there, something we should consider now, or is that something that's going to disqualify, even if we grant this, is going to disqualify them later unless they address it?
We don't, well, number one, occupancy, I don't have any information. I have not been provided enough information to give me incontrovertible evidence that there's 16 people residing in that. So,
Okay.
to my knowledge, all I have is the information presented in the application.
Which is 10?
Yes.
Okay.
As far as
Is it?
regarding parking, there was no information submitted regarding parking. And so that's why I say, if the special exception is approved, then their next step will be getting a design professional to put together a site plan that's scaled and shows all the dimensions for parking spaces. And if they aren't able to get 10 parking spaces, then they'll need to apply for a variance.
Thank you.
Which would be the case anyway. In other words, that's distinct from the special exception request.
Correct, it is.
Okay. Very good. Mr. Klein, would you like to offer any factual clarification in response to what you've heard?
Yeah, just on a couple issues.
Come on up and speak into the microphone.
Yeah, sure. There's currently 13 residents. 13. We asked for 16 total as a maximum. Some boards like to impose in granting a use variance, they like to put a condition saying you can have a maximum number of this people. So we figured, since there's 4 bedrooms per unit, correct? So this is a duplex, and there's 4 bedrooms per duplex. And so we thought as a fair maximum would be 2 people per bedroom, which is 8 per unit, which is less than 10 per boarding house, because there's 2 houses here. I know the code's a little interesting in that it says a rooming house is a detached building or something of that nature, but it doesn't make sense with respect to this property.
Oh, you're saying each side of the duplex, it would get 10?
No, it'd be 8 and 8.
Well, I know, you're saying
Yeah.
that the rules would be interpreted that to allow
The
each
rule-
of these as a rooming
The
house?
rules seem to be interpreted by, I don't want to speak for, for the code department.
No,
Well,
just according to
and
your
I don't want to
interpretation.
set up a dialogue between you either.
Yeah, I think what the city is saying is that you can only have 10 people in a building,
In a structure.
in a structure for a rooming house, irrespective of, I guess, how many units are there. Which, it doesn't really say that, but that's just what you would infer from the way it's written.
Right.
I don't think it makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, what does that mean? So my client could have a rooming house in one half of this building and a single family in the other half? I don't know. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So back to, I guess, a reasonable accommodation is our best approach, which I'm going to stick with because we don't fit. We have a square peg. We're trying to put it in a round hole. We don't fit within these guidelines. So we're looking for a reasonable accommodation. That's what was requested in our papers.
But is your reasonable accommodation that you don't need a special exception at all, or that you need the special exception, but we must give some extra deference due to the disabled nature of the residents? Which one?
I think it can be either one. I think the board
What are
could
you
say,
saying?
well, the board could say we're granting a special exception, but we're giving an accommodation with respect to parking, with respect to the number of people, with respect to this. You can adjust your requirements for a special exception in any way you want to accommodate this population to give them access to housing. That's your prerogative. Or you could just say we're giving a reasonable accommodation to allow to use this property in this way, blah, 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 with these parameters.
I'm not actually
Yeah.
certain you're correct there, but the board will
Yeah.
address that issue. Okay.
That's fine. And I just wanted to say with respect to parking, most people in recovery from substance use, they don't have cars. That's just typical.
Okay. We're not addressing parking tonight at all.
Okay, but I know people have issues with the number of cars. So
Parking, at some point or another, will be addressed, but not by us
I don't know
now.
if there's anything else.
I have one more.
Can you address
Sorry,
the
Lori, go ahead.
allegations about the police and the fire and
Yes,
rescue?
I'll address that. It wasn't every night, but there was a period of high activity, that is a fact, and I am not denying it, to be honest, because I don't want to lie to this board, to be honest. We do screen people who come in. We drug test people regularly, and we expect them to adhere to a code of well-being. We did have a period there where we got some bad clients, to be honest, and they just caused issues. They weren't ODs, actually. We've had a couple, another issue we have had a couple of medical issues that weren't related to ODs, to be honest. There are quite a few people early in recovery are suffering medically.
Sure.
Since we've made adjustments, I think she referenced that, but it's still, what I heard, I understand where she's coming from, and the last thing the reason we're coming here with the special exception is because I want to work with the city, to be honest, and I'm not, I want to work with the neighbors too. Honestly, hearing her testimony is not acceptable to her or me, if I'm being honest, or you, I would imagine. So I will discuss that with her afterwards on how I can accommodate the neighborhood better, because it's not acceptable to me what I heard, and I understand where she's coming from. We've made changes at the property. We've made a gender change at the property, honestly, so there's women there now, not men. Which...
You mean women only?
Women only, yes.
Typically sober houses are one or the other.
Yeah, men or women.
I see.
So it's a sober house for women, which, I don't know what I mean by that. They're just, you know what I mean? They're just, I just need to state it. I don't know, you know what I mean? And I did make that change specifically because I was having issues at the property and it was not okay with me. I have other sober livings that are in other areas. Concord, I hate to say this, I'm just gonna say it though. It's obviously drug and alcohol use in certain cities is higher than other cities, right? So in Concord, it seemed like it's
Well, we
it's-
have the prison and the state hospital,
for sure.
so. yeah.
Absolutely.
So you're getting a lot of people who may be coming.
And there's just access issues that honestly I've accommodated men in a different town that works better. I just got to be honest. It just works better, and I did face some issues with relapse, which causes disruption. We don't allow anybody at that property to use and stay there and cause. I understand her complaint, and part of it was legitimate. I just need to say that. We have made changes to the property. I feel like it has been more harmonious. I will continue to try to make it more harmonious with the neighbors, which I will discuss that with her after this. Right now, that has nothing to do with you. It has to do with me. I've increased, to be honest, who manages the property. I've increased the management to, there's 3 people who manage that property now. Three people who oversee the people there to make sure that it runs better. At first I had 1, then I had 2, now I have 3 people there trying to make sure that it is running smoothly and well with the residents.
Mr. Monahan, did
So yeah.
Thank you. Did you have a question?
Yeah, in our packet, I don't know if you've brought it, somebody else, is the definition of is it state law with regard to recovery housing? Is it registered with the state? You're complying with I know you're not here, it's just curious why it's in here, but as long as it is, you have to register or be licensed? Or
Yes,
something like that?
yeah, there's an organization, they just changed the organization, to be honest.
Well, you don't have to register or be licensed by the state to be a recovery residence or a sober house. So what you have to do
You have to be
is
certified.
you don't have to be certified, registered, there's no actual requirement, but if you want to,
Voluntary
if you want to
certification,
obtain relief from fire protection requirements, then you do have to pursue that certification, okay?
Yeah.
Which is, so if you don't want to put in sprinklers in the house, you've got to go to the fire marshal. He's got a checklist of things you have to do, they inspect the house, and you can, with the approval of the fire marshal, and you can avoid costly sprinkler requirements.
Yes.
Maybe, if you said this earlier, I missed it, is a staff member actually living on site?
Correct.
Is someone there, and you say you have
Yes.
3 people managed, is
3.
someone there
They're residents.
24/7?
Yes. Yes. Which
And-
honestly is higher standard than most sober houses, believe it or not.
Right.
There's normally a resident living there who is part of the community, who has a longer period of sobriety. They have over a year of sobriety. We have 3 now living there that rotate to make sure that there's oversight at the property all the time. Yeah. And honestly, I have owned sober livings. I've been in recovery for 27 years. I got sober when I was 17. I know I look whatever. I'm very passionate about this population, but at the same note, the last thing I want to do is come here and fight with the city or the residents. And honestly, the standard there, what happened at the house initially, I don't know why it wasn't harmonious, but it wasn't. I have made changes.
I think we've covered that.
Yeah, I got you. Sorry. So there's 3. Yeah, there's somebody overseeing the property at all times. at
Any
this
other
point.
questions from the board? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Ms. Skinner, could you fill us in on the rationale for 2 as opposed to 1? Why it's considered one rooming house by the city?
Yes. Let me pull up
I believe it's in
it's in the staff memo.
yeah, but it might be helpful to
Yes.
discuss it tonight.
That here. A rooming house is a detached dwelling unit containing sleeping accommodations for individuals other than members of the resident family and having common kitchen and dining facilities. A duplex is a pair of attached dwelling units designed or intended for residential use for exclusive occupancy by two families.
Okay. So the ordinance doesn't actually contemplate two rooming houses attached to each other.
It does not.
Okay.
It contemplates a house. A detached dwelling unit is a house.
Right.
So it contemplates a house serving as a rooming house, not a duplex with both units serving as a rooming house.
Very good, thank you. With that, we'll declare the public testimony portion of the hearing closed. We have a request to grant a special exception for a rooming house. As I understand it, the city's take on this is that the maximum number of people in the entire building is 10, both sides. Okay.
Correct.
And that is the request that we're considering for a special exception?
I think that would have to be a condition of approval.
Okay.
It would be. Yeah, because they have requested.
They requested
they've
16 or whatever it was.
two occupants in each of the 4 bedrooms in each unit for a total of 16.
Right.
And in staff's estimation, that would violate the code.
Which would require a variance.
Yes.
Okay.
So even if we granted the special exception and then they went with 16, they'd have to come back according to staff. Yeah.
Or a variance, yes, for the occupancy.
Okay. Very good. I'm going to start with Ms. Spector Morgan. What are your thoughts on this? I bet you've got some.
I do. Well, keeping in mind that we can't look at who lives there, we have to look at the use of the property. And looking at the special exception criteria, it does appear that the requested use of a rooming house is specifically authorized by the ordinance. And the use itself would not create undue traffic congestion or impair pedestrian safety. The use of a rooming house would not overload any public or private water, drainage, or sewer system, or any other municipal system, nor would there be an increase in stormwater runoff onto adjacent property because the physical structure isn't changing. A rooming house would not create excessive demand for municipal police, fire protection, schools, or solid waste disposals. And although we heard testimony that this particular property did initially create an increased demand, we also heard testimony that that had decreased as time has gone on. Are there any supplemental standards in Article 28.5?
There are not.
So there's no supplemental standards in 28.5. It's not a non-conforming use or structure. And I guess sort of where I get hung up is whether or not the requested use would create hazards with the health, safety, or general welfare of the public, or be detrimental or out of character with the adjacent neighborhood, which is single-family homes and duplexes. Now, the duplex itself isn't out of character with the adjacent neighborhood, but a rooming house, maybe. And it may or may not be appropriate to put a rooming house in a single-family residential neighborhood, but a use permitted by special exception is a permitted use under certain circumstances. So, all things in, I'm inclined to approve the use conditioned on it being limited to 10 occupants, and knowing it's got to go to the planning board for approval as well.
Mr. Winters.
I'm getting a little caught up on that create excessive demand for municipal police fire protection. I mean, we've heard, I think, undisputed evidence that until somewhat recently, and maybe an ongoing, there has been continued high volume of calls. And by the applicant's statement, some of that is medical, but so it's not, it's not that we're going to, morality or anything, but it's just that this population has additional needs and or may require more police attention. If we don't look at all at the population that's using the facility and simply are looking at whether it's a rooming house, does that mean we can't look at all at the historical police log? And I think we can, because we're looking at this particular applicant, in which case, for me to consider this, I would want to see what the call history looks like at this property. I mean, is it, the applicant was very sincere, and, and I really appreciate everything they do, everything he's doing. I mean, he's obviously very dedicated to this very important work. But I would want to see what, has it really tapered off, like he says, to the extent he says? I mean, what did it look like prior to them taking over? Then there was like that year or so where it was bumpy, and then it's gotten better. How much better has it really gotten? Can we consider that? And then that also gets into the question we were looking at earlier. What do we do about the fact that they have special protection on the ADA and the FHA? The applicant would almost suggest that it's just, they can get a room house anywhere in the city and we can't even look at it at all. And that can't be right. But at the same time, does that mean we just judge it, don't even take that into account at all? Because the law says that the city on some level has to provide some type of reasonable accommodation. And I don't know is that code enforcement? How would they do that? Is it us? How would we do that? That's not really clear. So I would prefer to recess this so we could get more information about the police history and get a more researched opinion from city council over how we're supposed to, if at all, who and how we would apply the ADA and the FHA to this population.
Mr. Monahan?
Yeah, there's a lot going on, so.
I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm struggling with some of the same things that Andrew is. Whether this is the forum to deal with ADA issues. We often do it when it comes to handicapped accessibility, but this is somewhat new to us. This is not the first time we've seen this issue of trying to fit sober living into the rooming house ordinances. So note to the city, it may be the most appropriate thing at some point is to create square holes for square pegs, and it might be helpful to everybody if we were to adopt an ordinance that accommodated recovery housing and sober living, because it is an important part of the struggle that's underway with substance use disorder. That said, I tend to agree with Andrew that it might be appropriate to table this matter for now. I'm struggling with too narrow a reading of the structure, because it's two homes, right? There's two kitchens, it's duplex, and again, that's another one of the square hole. And then finally, with regard to the record that's before us, there's a great record before us about why the accommodation has to be provided for, but not much when it comes to special exception. It's really too weak to get to yes. So if you were to make a motion to table, I would second that.
Mr. Waller?
I too have concerns. I have concerns that were expressed by other members here in regards to demand for municipal police. It's not clear to me if that's really been dealt with adequately at this time. Yes, there's been a decrease, but is it within reason? I also have concerns about the number of units, and I have concerns about the general welfare of the public.
Okay. In other words, you'd be inclined to vote against a special exception if it were to come to that.
Either to table it for a clear picture on some of the activities here.
What would a clearer picture consist of in your mind?
I'd say minimal police calls.
So the same question that Andrew raised.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, a substantial decrease, one that would maybe an average for the whole city would be representative of that particular property.
Okay. I'm inclined to agree with Mr. Monahan that we've run into this problem before. And I think the problem stems from the fact that we're trying to use the wrong wrench on this bolt. For fear of having to explain that metaphor, there needs to be specific accommodation in the code for these types of facilities, just as there are for other types of facilities, hospitals, churches, daycares, all kinds of things that have special populations that have particular characteristics. And we don't have it. So we're trying to deal with it with a part of the statute that kind of does and kind of doesn't apply. As a subject of the two buildings, I'm inclined to say that the wording of calling it a structure, in my mind, if the two structures don't communicate, if you don't walk back and forth between them, you've got two structures, even though they happen to be physically attached. And so I would be inclined to agree with the proposition that you could have two rooming houses, each with X number of bedrooms in them that happen to be attached. However, and as far as the ADA questions go, I don't see this as being the right place to try and resolve that, which I said earlier. I don't think that the question of reasonable accommodation, at least as I understand it, have encountered it in my work, applies exactly to this situation in the way that the appellant is proposing that it does. And I suspect that would have to be adjudicated. Because it may have been, and there may be precedents, and we could perhaps find them, but I'm not aware of any of them. We didn't hear any cited tonight. So I guess my feeling on the matter is that much as I see serious problems with this, I would be inclined to agree with Ms. Spector-Morgan that absent consideration of the specific population, which is not an assumption under the ordinance for considering a rooming house, I think it's rooming house qua rooming house that might create violations of the requirements of a special exception, but not just who happens to be living in it, because it could be somebody, one population now, another population another time. Same rooming house under the same special exception. So I haven't heard anything that convinces me that they don't meet the criteria of a special exception. I've heard plenty that convinces me that we have an unsolved problem here. But I would be, within what I believe to be the pen in which I sit as a member of the zoning board, I would have to vote in favor of an appeal. So it sounds, or in favor of a special exception. So it sounds like we've got, I'm hearing 3 board members going in one direction and 2 in another. So I'd solicit a motion from any of them, and then we'll see how it sugars out.
Chris, if you want, so.
Could I try and explain what I just said?
Yeah, but Ms. Spector-Morgan's motion was to limit it to 10.
She didn't make a motion yet.
Her observations was that she would, so, but you're saying this issue of it's two homes under.
Yeah,
so you could get to 16.
Yeah, well, whether it's 16 or
20.
Yeah, I don't see a clear, in the wording of the ordinance, I don't see a clear prohibition on considering it 2 boarding houses, or 2 rooming houses.
Yeah.
So I might not agree with her there. So I might not want to vote for a proposal that had that restriction on it. On the other hand, it might be a half a loaf situation where I'd say, yeah, I'll vote for it because it's going in the right direction. Life is easier when you just watch TV, you know. So would anyone care to make a motion either in favor of granting, in favor of denying, in favor of tabling, which are the 3 propositions that I think have been discussed here?
I'm going to move to table it, and I'm going to specifically, as part of that motion, ask that we be able to meet and it could be over the phone, get some opinion from council as to if we are at all to treat the ADA FHA issue, and if so, how we would do that. And I do understand what Chair Carley is saying with regard to, the thought that we're not really best suited to do that, and I understand that point, but my concern on that is then who is? Right, somebody's got to. I mean, we're quasi-city officials, I suppose, at least in this capacity, and I'm not sure that, all the city's going to say is you need a special exception. So if nobody's giving any deference, then I think the city, I'm not sure about this case in particular, but that could create a concern. So I'd like to get council's view on that.
So you'd like to move to table with the idea that the board solicited legal consultations,
Yes.
and then take it off the table once we were satisfied that we knew what we needed to know to act on the request?
Yeah, when we put it, I guess typically we would put it to it next month if possible, and often we would just talk to council, we'd meet a little earlier and talk to them.
Okay.
That's how we've done in the past.
Yep.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded.
But consistent with my observations on this, when we do revisit it, perhaps some more information from the applicant with regard to how are you going to accommodate not burdening city services going forward, and what are the consequences if you do, if you don't, and then any additional clarity about why we should view this as two homes rather than one.
Okay. In the event that this motion carries, we should make it clear that we plan to take testimony again, so that anybody that's here tonight knows, because we closed the hearing. So anybody that is here tonight, or anybody watching from the safety of their own home, knows that we will take testimony again. New information might come out at a subsequent meeting.
And if I may add, it would also be helpful if we had some information from the police department about the calls to the property since the conveyance.
I already have that noted.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on the motion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Nay. The vote is 4-1 with the chair in the minority, and the case is tabled pending the activities that we discussed prior to the motion.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Have a good night.
You're welcome.
Just before we start the next case, I'm going to depart, and Dave is going to take over.
Mr. Davey.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Mr. Davies, I'm sorry, I'm calling you Davis. Do you have a full packet, or do you want mine?
I have it online.
Online?
Yeah.
Okay. You got your bat weight? You're in the on-deck circle? Okay, well, we have, one member has left the room for a few minutes. When she comes back, we'll go on to the next case, which is case number 4.2, Ryan A. Martin and Kelly L. Martin, who request approval for a variance from Section 2841 dimensional standards and Section 28532 accessory buildings and facilities to allow a 13-foot tall shed to be placed 5 feet from the side property line where a 15-foot setback is required for an accessory building greater than 12 feet in height at tax map lot 193P10, addressed at 43 Alice Drive, Pennacook, in the medium residential district, ZBA 0237-2024. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but?
I do.
Why don't we wait for the testimony until our Ms. Spector Morgan returns to... All set? Please identify yourself for the record and let us know why you feel this variance, is there more than one variance? Just one is justified.
My name is Ryan A. Martin. I'm here for my shed at 43 Alice Drive. It exceeds the height restriction, and I'm asking for a variance on that.
Would you hold us a moment? Gentlemen, could we have the conversation outside? Thank you. You know better. Excuse me for that. Please proceed.
So located at my property sits on a rotary. It's not a square lot, and due to the layout. It has a slope on one side where it's hard to differentiate between the front and the side yard, and that would be affected by having to have the shed behind in the side or the rear yard. So I'm limited to where I could put the shed, and my wife has spoken with the neighbor, and they don't have an issue with the height of it or the location of it, and it is where I used to have a play structure that was of similar height. So I don't see it having any impact on the public. It's only visible from the Kyle Road side. You can't really see it from the Alice Road side now, because it's located kind of kitty corner to the garage.
How did you wind up, you've already built this shed, correct?
Yes, but it's not finished.
Okay. How did, I mean, obviously, when you started to build it, you were unaware of this requirement.
I had put in for the permit, I can't remember when, but I waited quite a bit of time before I started building it. And I might have been aware, but I don't remember the height restriction on that.
Did you get a permit?
Yes, I had a permit, and then I had I believe it was Jason from Code Enforcement come do an inspection.
Yeah.
And then he noticed that it was too tall, so I put in for a variance for the height.
When you applied for the permit, did you include a drawing of the shed?
I don't believe I included a drawing at that time. I have a drawing now and a photo.
Okay, yeah, with that we've seen. Why does it have to be as tall as it is?
To help reduce snow load, and I kind of overbuilt the foundation of it. I went with like 2x8 and some 6x6 skids, so that added to the height of the overall structure. So it's a lot more rugged than I had intended, but it increased the height about 14 inches when I did it that way. So now I'm looking for a variance to accommodate for the extra height.
Very good. Other questions from the board? Not getting a lot of enthusiasm from the questions. Is there anything else you'd like to know?
The one where the shed is located, the neighbor that it would impact the most has said that they have no issue with it.
Wait, sorry, I do have a question, or is it 13 feet, or is it 13 feet and 10 inches?
It's technically 13 feet and 9 inches, but I threw in an extra inch for cushion. We still have to finish it.
But the agenda says a 13-foot tall shed.
Yeah, I don't know why it says 13 feet on the agenda, but on the zoning board adjustment application, I put height of 1310.
What did the notice say?
What's that?
What did the notice say?
It likely says 13.
You can't sink it down, can you? Like dig and, no. Doesn't look like that.
Make a root cellar out of it instead of a shed.
I'm not an architect.
Why can't it be moved outside the setback?
Why can't it be moved outside the setback? Probably weight for one thing now. It's behind a privacy fence, and to get equipment to move it would be difficult to get in there and pull it out of the setback. And I had a play structure in the same place, and there was no issue with the neighbor when that was there, and they have no issue now. And the back property line has a tree line, so none of the neighbors behind my house can see it, so I don't think it's an issue.
Other questions from the board?
Well, just to follow up on that, because I think what her question was getting at is not like, why can't you move it now, but why didn't you, or was there a spot you could have put it in within the setback when you were deciding where to put it, or was there no other spot that was really feasible within the layout of your yard.
To me, this was the best location.
What was
Why
wrong
was
with-
it the best
yeah,
location?
Why?
Ease of access, and then it wouldn't fill in a large portion of the backyard. The backyard is not that deep, so we wanted to maintain that space for other use and keep the shed off to the side.
Very good.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you very much, Mr. Martin.
Thank you.
Is there anyone who wishes to be heard in favor of this appeal? Is there anyone who wishes to be heard in opposition to it? Is there any comment from code enforcement?
None.
With that, we'll declare the public testimony portion of the hearing closed. We have a request to grant, I do have one question from code enforcement. How, does the ordinance define the height as the top of the ridge?
Well, I believe it does.
Because there are situations where in certain codes, that's not how the height's determined.
Give me a moment, and
And
I will
when you have a
look up
pitch
the
roof.
definition of height.
Oh, and then how, what would the alternative being, sort of the
Under,
median?
it may be archaic, but I know in building codes that I've encountered, a pitched roof, the height was halfway up the pitch,
That makes sense.
not the ridge.
Right,
I mean, as far as the code was concerned.
right.
And I'd like to confirm what the notice said, because we may have to do that for anyway.
Confirm?
Yes, if the notice only said 13 feet and it's actually 1310.
Because I think the agenda is the notice, right?
I don't know whether it's the same or not.
Yeah.
The height of a building or structure shall be determined by measuring the vertical distance between the average ground level around the perimeter of the building or structure and either the highest point of the roof beam of a flat roof, the mean level of the highest gable of a sloping roof, or the highest point on a structure.
Mean level of the height.
Sorry, can you repeat that second one? The mean level of?
The mean level of the highest gable of a sloping roof.
That's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, it is. Yes,
The
yeah, that's how I would,
the gable is that the
the
same thing as
gable
the
is
ridge
the
line?
triangle on the end of it. That's a technical term for it. Gable's a layman's term. Triangles.
Triangle's the technical term?
And if you want to go Greek on me, it's pediment.
And so that would require, staff would have to do just a little bit of
Yeah,
calculating.
Okay, thank you.
Chances are it's probably less than 13 feet, is what you're saying.
Well, yeah, it seems,
Well, it has to be less than 12.
well, it might be less than 12.
But if we grant 13, he'd be okay, but if we,
But it sounds like we have there's a flaw in the notice as well. And
Wouldn't that be a moot issue if we're dealing with the way the height is configured based on the ordinance? If it's going to be less than 12 feet, then it's a moot issue whether it was noticed correctly or not
well, if that were the case, then we could rule that the variance isn't necessary.
for the height.
Yeah, which is the only variance he's asking for. But I'm not certain that I know that that's true. So I don't know about the rest of you, but I would be inclined,
But what about the 5 feet from a side property line where 15-foot setback is required?
it's allowed to be 5,
As long as it's 12 feet or less.
yeah, it's considered a accessory structure.
oh, I didn't appreciate that. So it's the height is what's requiring
Yeah,
the
it's,
setback variance.
there's a requirement for
Right.
height and a requirement for area.
I should have
Yeah.
realized.
It meets
Okay.
the area requirement, small enough. It was 150 square feet, I think. And the area is, I don't know, what, 300 or something, it's
250.
250.
It meets the area, but it's over the height.
Yeah.
Oh, so if
Yes,
we,
it was noticed as 13.
It was noticed as
Oh,
13.
but we don't have, so are we granting just one variance for the setback because it's over 12? Or
No,
we?
he's requesting a variance from the height. From the height
Oh.
requirement for
Just
an
the height.
accessory structure to allow the 5-foot setback. He could have
Done it the opposite.
alternatively requested a setback variance
Right, he could have done them in the alternative.
from the 15 feet to allow 5 feet.
In which case, it could be any height he presents.
Yep.
Yeah, it does say 13-foot tall shed.
Yep.
So, Laura, what was your thinking?
Well, I think we need to know how tall the shed actually is.
Right. So I guess my own impulse on this would be to recess it, get these things clarified.
We're setting up a lot of work for next month.
Yeah. But I wouldn't want to deny, and I
Right.
don't want to have loose ends, so.
Well, if we granted it, I'm not suggesting what we should do, but if we do grant it, then it's not going to help him if he's over 13, and in which case he could come back with his alternative for the
Yeah.
setback.
Well, I think we need to ask, I mean, someone at Code Enforcement, he mentioned a name and I don't remember who it was, it doesn't matter, made a judgment. I want to make sure that they didn't misread the ordinance. Because that's why I asked that other question.
No, it was a good question, because they might have just assumed it was the highest point, because this
Yeah.
doesn't come up that much.
I get one good question.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
Yeah, that was it. We're over. Okay, that would be my impulse. How do other people feel about it?
Yeah, that's
Would-
fine.
I think we have to, because.
Okay. Would anyone care to make a motion?
Move the table.
Move to table. Is there a second?
Second.
And is it a condition of the motion that we get a report back from Code Enforcement about how the calculation was made and why? And was there something else? No, that was it.
Oh.
And if it is in fact more than 13 feet, that we renotice the variance application to.
If it's more than 13.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does he need a new application, or can they just renotice this one?
No, he doesn't need a new application.
They could you could renotice it for next month
Yeah.
with the correct.
That would be the only
Just
fair
At
thing
the
to do.
city's expense.
I need some more information on measurements in order to calculate, in
Yeah.
order to calculate.
Or one fewer architect on the board, either way. Okay.
But because if it turns out it's
Less
under.
architect, one less lawyer. Think how much easier things would be.
Right?
We get down to real people.
Because if it turns out he's less than 12 under the measurement, he wouldn't need a variance at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The case is adjourned, recessed until next meeting, which is February, whatever it is. First Wednesday in February.
February 5th, I believe.
Which brings us to our next case this evening.
Fun case this
Yeah.
evening.
I was like, why isn't everybody leaving?
Which is 4.3 Cronin, Bisson, and Zelinsky, PC, and North 40 LLC, on behalf of Concord Regional Solid Waste Resource Recovery Co-op, request approval for a variance from Section 28.2.4A, uses permitted by right. To permit by right residential use where residential use is not permitted at, I assume it would be to permit by variance, but is that, it still isn't right if it's a variance, is it?
By variance.
Residential use where residential use is not permitted at tax map lot 06P8, unaddressed Whitney Road in Pennacook, in the Industrial IN District, ZBA 0238, 2024. Gentlemen, do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but?
I do.
I do.
Would you give us your names for the record, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, good to see you again, members of the board. My name is John Cronin.
I am Kevin Lacasse.
And your addresses?
My address is 722 Chestnut Street, Manchester, New Hampshire. 03104.
368 New Hampshire Route 104, New Hampton.
Carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure to represent the applicant in this particular case. As the application package notes and was commented in the introduction to the case, what we're seeking this evening is a variance to allow multifamily development on this property, which is referenced as sometimes the North 40 or Zero Whitney. And I think you all know that by the commercial area that's been recently developed up off of the exit going into the Pennacook Boston area, also adjacent to the wind waste facility. There's been some history with this property, which Kevin will go into in a little detail. Initially, there was a plan or a vision to do a much larger development, but after some feedback from the city and different folks that thought that that may be too large, there was a refocus to try and minimize it and focus on an affordable housing component. We know the city has experienced a lot of development with new apartment properties, not only here in Concord, but if you go down the corridor, Manchester, Londonderry, Salem, there's an abundance of apartments that are being built. And I think we can all agree it's not for sport. It's because there's a overwhelming demand for housing and a deep concern about the cost of existing housing, pricing workers and other people out of the marketplace. What we believe is different about this particular project compared to most others is the high percentage of affordable units in this particular project. Now, we're not asking you to approve a specific number this evening. The plan that was submitted was designed, Ed Roberge, our engineer from Stantec, is with us. He can speak a little bit later, but he did the work on numbers based on what he believed the land could support, based on its unique features and wetlands and other things done by preliminary engineering. But we recognize that unit count is a matter for the planning board, and they may choose to change that number once a complete engineering process is done. So we're receptive to any type of condition that would say not to exceed the 194 proposed in an amount that's appropriate for the planning board if we're fortunate to get to that level. Also, we would agree that the ratio of affordable to market rate would stay. It's roughly, if you do the 100 into the 194 as proposed, it comes out to 0.5155. So if the planning board chose to reduce the numbers, we'd always maintain affordable component of that number. When you look at some of the other projects around that, proposed workforce, and this is affordable, which is a distinctly different project and arguably much more in need. Typically, you see percentages of the total project being 10, 20, and rarely do you see them over 30%. But this is really focused on an affordable design in concert with Ketch, who you all know and has done great work in the city and provided a lot of affordable options. Mr. Furtado's with us, and he'll speak to his role and his vision shortly. When we came in, initial comments, we recognized the site is industrially zoned. It's been industrial for many years. The master plan was done in 2008, and I know there's some budgets talked about funding for 2006, perhaps maybe a completed master plan in 2028 or even later. I know with government and other business, sometimes the best planning and projections don't always come true, and they take a little bit longer. In Concord's case, the fire station over in the east side and the sewer. So it's many years away before that master plan will be done. One of the things of concern, we got a staff report that's dated December 11th, was emailed with the agenda to our office, a link on the 26th. Got to it the following week with the holiday week and had an opportunity to review it. It's quite different than most of the staff reports that I see and review. It's very lengthy. It has a lot of opinions, and I would say advocacy against certain issues respect to this project, which is unusual for me to see. Maybe you see it from time to time, but I reviewed it. It was a concern. I know it was a busy week and a holiday week. I reached out because, in my view, having seen the great work of Ms. Skinner over the years, didn't look like her work product entirely. And I had asked who participated in the preparation of this report, and particularly with the positions of certain items and conclusions. And I didn't get a response to that. I did have an opportunity to talk to Mr. Walsh, who I have the utmost respect for If I was running a business or running a municipality, he would be my #1 draft pick. He's smart, he's thorough, and he's a get-it-done type of guy. And he was kind enough to tell me it was a collaborative effort. I appreciate that, but I think in fairness and due process to the applicant, we do have a right to know who participated and authorized the conclusions. I don't know if individual staff members have that authority. Certainly the governing body might after a public hearing with some notice, or public meeting, I should say. And I don't believe that's happened. But the staff report is the staff report. I'm not going to belabor it. That's an issue for us at a different time, at a different place, in a different forum. We're here to present information on the 5 criteria for a variance. And I think the staff report has a lot of things in it about rezoning attempts and a whole bunch of other things that don't really apply here. But I think despite the length of the report, one of the serious omissions that I think impeaches the entire work product is the failure to recognize RSA 672(1). And that's the enabling authority granted by the legislature to empower communities to adopt zoning and planning regulations. I will submit that there was a revision to it that will become effective that has nothing to do with the relevant sections here. This has been on the books for quite a while. I'm going to read subparagraph 3E. It says, all citizens of the state benefit from a balanced supply of housing, which is affordable to persons and families of low and moderate income. Establishment of housing which is decent, safe, sanitary, and affordable to low and moderate income persons and families is in the best interest of each community and the state of New Hampshire and serves a vital public need. Opportunity for development of such housing shall not be prohibited or unreasonably discouraged by use of municipal planning, zoning powers, or unreasonable interpretation of such powers. I don't believe that statutory section was given much, if any, consideration. I may be mistaken, but I hope if the chair deems it appropriate, at the appropriate time, have an opportunity to ask the planning department who by name was involved in the preparation, research, and gave the authority to make conclusions in a staff report. Without knowing who did it, right, it's hard for us to address it. Is there any bias in it? Is there a different agenda? But I'll leave that to the discretion of the board.
I think you'll find that the board will accept at face value what the staff presents, and we're not interested in who specifically was involved in creating it.
Yeah, I just ask in transparency in government. I think it'd be nice to know, but I appreciate your position.
Understood.
I won't mention it again. Okay. What I will say, there has been some history here, and I'll let Kevin talk to it, but there's been a lot of people in support of this. People within the town, within governing body positions and otherwise. And I'll turn it over to Kevin now, who's the principal of this project, has put a lot of time and effort, and I'll have him give you the history.
Thank you for hearing us tonight. I appreciate it. So, as you know, I'm Kevin Lacasse with New England Family Housing. I have 2 partners on the project. One of them is here with me tonight, Dan Navaroli, and our other partner is Mike Dion. He unfortunately wasn't able to make it tonight. We're a New Hampshire-based developer, developed and currently own a portfolio of multifamily market-rate apartments, affordable housing units, manufactured housing communities, and do a fair amount of product that we build for sale throughout New Hampshire, as well as some stuff in North Carolina and Texas. So when I got involved in this project originally, I had met with Dean and we looked at the Concord Monitor building itself in thinking that we could convert that into a housing project. The building doesn't work for housing, and we noted, we figured that out pretty quickly. So from there, we kind of changed our focus to the land to the north of the Concord Monitor building, which was the southern 95 section as well as this north 40 piece. And our vision for it was something that we think New Hampshire really needs, and it was in line with the Concord Next zoning initiative after meeting with the city staff at the beginning and the then city planner Heather Shank. It was in line with what we thought was needed for this property. So it was a mixed use. It had market rate housing for rent, affordable housing for rent. It had product for sale. It had some commercial retail components and some self-storage. But after, negotiations and talks with the city, it was realized or, brought up later that, this land should be kept for industrial use. So we heard that loud and clear and we said, okay, well, let's take another look at this. How can we do that? So Dean will talk more about the industrial piece of it later. But we said, well, let's take a look at this and do a scaled down approach. Let's keep the South 95 available for industrial or some other use at a later date, and let's just focus on the North 40. Will industrial there work? And there's some anomalies on that property which really begs to the hardship of it that Dean will get into more as to why industrial will not work on that property and why we think what we're doing is appropriate. So we feel the spirit of the ordinance has been being met because of, over 50% of the units are affordable housing that we're proposing here. And the master plan does promote affordable housing throughout the city. So we feel we're kind of meeting that from that aspect. So over the last 2 years, early on, we were told by city staff to do a lot of public outreach. So we took that to heart and we did. We met with the Pennacook Village Association 3 times. We met with or gave presentations to the Concord Chamber of Commerce, to the Rotary Club. I did a presentation at the New Hampshire Housing's Home Ownership Conference that was held here in Concord last year. We met with local businesses, local residents, elected officials, including the councilor ward, as well as other councilors and the mayor. And overwhelmingly, there was support. There was concerns, but there was support for the project. Early on, city council even said, yes, let's work, directed to work through the issues with us as a developer, because overall, we like the idea, the theme of the project, but the issue at the beginning was that we were asking for some city involvement in the cost of the roadway, which we are not doing now. So, and because of the positive responses owned and the, or shown and the, through the public interest or throughout our public outreach, we felt that we really met that public interest criteria because the feedback we've gotten has been pretty positive. And as I said, we had been working with city staff, and until recently, when the industrial issue came up, they said we were going in the right direction with the exception of the cost share of the roadway that we were asking for. Now, to kind of further, kind of build on that, when the TIF improvements were done to support the commercial development at Merchants Way, a traffic study was done to warrant, putting in that public expenditure for that. And in that traffic study, they took into account the traffic that would be generated at Merchants Way, but they also took in traffic considerations for the development of this site. And interestingly, that traffic that they had, built into their traffic study was not just industrial traffic. It was mixed-use traffic because it was always thought that this property would be used for mixed use. So, that's why we had kind of thought we were, on the right track. The other thing, is there a need for this project? Well, with the vacancy rate well under 1%, some could say it's 0.3%, that's 1 out of every 333 houses that would be, or units that would be available for rent at any given time. So if 3 families are out looking for an apartment, there would have to be 1,000 units for them to be able to find one at the current vacancy rates. There's not enough housing. We're in a crisis. Everyone does know that. A balanced market is a 5% vacancy rate. That's 1 out of every 20 units. Now, with a stable, that still allows a landlord to make money and rents still increase. We're talking about wanting to, in the state, at least plateau rents or potentially even be able to bring rents down a little bit. We would have to achieve vacancy rates in a 10 to 15% range for that to happen. So, and I know the staff reports, points out to a lot of projects in the pipeline. I think there's like 2,000 projects in the pipeline. Well, the state's saying we need 60,000 units throughout the state, of course, in the next 5 years. That would mean that 60,000 units should be at some point of planning in this state right now, and I'd be willing to bet that we're not. And in 15 years, 90,000 units. So the 2,000 units that are currently in the pipeline in Concord is barely scratching the surface. And even if those do get approved, there's no way they're all going to get built. I know for a fact that some of them have already been put on hold. So even though we say, oh, we're building 2,000 units, until they're constructed, there's no way. So as a community, as a state even, we really need to be approving more stuff than, you know, than we could build. Because again, that number of 60,000 in the next 5 years, you really should have approvals of probably double that in order to have 60,000 units built.
Wait, when you say probably double that, is that just off the cuff, or I mean,
Yeah,
do you
that-
have some
yeah, so
data on the ratio that are actually approved based on?
Right. I mean, there's probably statistics out there as far as what gets approved versus what actually gets built. I don't have that
Okay, you're just
statistic with me,
I got it.
so I just kind of threw that one out.
Okay.
But affordability is a major benefit here, as I said, with over 50% of the units being affordable, as opposed to most of the other projects that are in the pipeline have a very minimum amount of affordable units. And that is in the documentation in the staff report as far as, you know, which projects are in that pipeline and being considered. Merchants Way, they've done a great job in producing jobs in the area, as well as the other local businesses. But what is not done to support Merchants Way, those other businesses, is housing. I mean, in that landmass area right now, 10 years ago, there would be about 600 jobs less than when Merchants Way is fully built out. And that is a number that I did hear. So those 600 people now that are in that area, where are they supposed to live? So it really shows and creates a need for what we're trying to do here. You know, we're basically one generation away from not having a workforce to support all of us as we're aging out of the workforce. If we don't have, you know, we got to build housing in order to forego that from happening. And building more housing is the only way to do it. So with that said, that's why we're here today seeking a variance. You know, we have funding lined up, we have contractors lined up, we're ready to go. We could start building product. You know, if we get the variance here, we would move to site plan review, and then our hope would be to start construction next year and start delivering units in 2026 to try to meet that demand that is there now. You know, and I think all of us here today have an opportunity and quite possibly a responsibility to make that happen. So that's kind of why we're here. Now, if we wait on, you know, because there's talk about, well, we should wait for the zoning regulator or the master plan to be rewritten and then the zoning regulations to be rechanged. When we started working on this project 2.5 years ago, Concord Next was the zoning initiative that was going at that time, and that was imminent from getting zoned or getting voted into place. They said by the end of the year it should be in. That was, I think, 2022. So if we're saying that a master plan is going to be ready by 2028, 2020, or 2030, we're going to miss the boat. We're just not going to build housing. So that's where you know, what we have to say about that. So as far as, you know, we mentioned Catch Neighborhood Housing. We have a long-standing relationship with them. We've partnered with them on a couple projects, one in Bristol, one in Claremont in years past. And we're looking to do so here again. So with that, I'd like to bring Tom up and see if he can say a couple things.
Good evening. Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Could we have your name, please?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, my name is Tom Furtado. I'm the president and CEO of Catch Neighborhood Housing, and we're located here in Concord. And thank you for allowing me to speak a few minutes about the project. Kevin expressed it, but I don't think anyone really needs to explain the need for housing and specifically affordable housing throughout not only the state of New Hampshire, but the country probably, and certainly a problem here in Concord. So Catch has been in business approximately 35 years, and we build affordable housing. We build and maintain affordable housing. That's what we do. And we've done several projects within the city as well as up in Franklin and Bow and various different municipalities. We're very excited to work with Kevin and his group. As he mentioned, we've done deals together in the past on the property management side of things, and we're excited to get an invitation to take over and do the affordable housing portion of this great, what I think would be a great project if they're able to get it approved. So it's the estimate right now is approximately 100 units of affordable housing. Catch would step in, take control of that piece of it, and build those units using the low-income housing tax credit program. We would likely do that in 1 or maybe 2 phases. We have some pretty exciting projects, and we have some ideas of architectural design and layout and form that we think would fit perfect on that site, along with the other housing that the North 40 group is looking to construct up there. So one of the misconceptions that I always like to point out in a public setting is we're a nonprofit, 501c3 nonprofit organization. So people make the assumption that, oh, we don't pay real estate taxes. Not true. All of our affordable housing developments, we pay real estate taxes on just like anyone else. We've paid approximately $650,000 annually in real estate taxes, nearly $500,000 of that to the city of Concord. It averages out to about $1,700 to $1,800 per year per apartment. So using round numbers, 100 units at $1,700, this particular affordable housing piece of the overall project would generate about $170,000 in tax revenue to the city of Concord. Just wanted to, I'm sure everyone here is aware of that tax situation, but I do like to point that out because it's brought up to me all the time. You build affordable housing and it comes off the tax roll. Completely not true. So we're excited about North 40 getting approval to go ahead with this development. We would absolutely be excited to step in and take care of the affordable housing piece of it. And just on another note, hopefully you're aware that we not only build these developments, but we maintain them and we own them for, well, it's about a 60-year hold right now. So we're here for the long term. It's not anything where it would be built and then turned over to anyone else. If there's any questions for me, love to answer them.
Carry on. Well, thank you much.
Thank you.
In terms of the industrial piece, the staff report, and I think the general consensus is the preservation of this site for industrial. It is 40 acres, but when you look at the special conditions to the property, particularly the way the wetlands traverse the site, I'm going to bring someone up that's going to talk about the opportunity for industrial. You'd have about 50,000 square feet of industrial space that you could build there with a small amount of laydown area. Most of these industrial users not only want the building, but they want some space to lay down and put different things out in the yards and so forth. Relatively small industrial use. When we get to the tax component, you'll see the difference of tax generation from a 50,000 square foot industrial site built out compared to the tax revenue that would be generated here in an annual basis. I'm going to call up Dean Navaroli. He's an experienced real estate professional and also involved in this project.
Good evening.
Good evening. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but.
I do. Dean Navaroli. 23 Silver Lake Road, Hollis, New Hampshire. Thank you everyone for hearing us tonight. Just for background, my name is Dean Navaroli. I'm the principal and owner of William Reeves Commercial Real Estate and Rockfish Asset Management. New Hampshire born and raised, and also a Concord taxpayer. We own some, myself and some partners own some commercial real estate in Concord, so over in the Heights. So, as far as experience, I have over 35 years of large-scale commercial real estate experience with a primary focus on industrial and office product. First 20 years of my career was spent in downtown Boston, working for different groups like Trammell Crow Company, Reef or Deutsche Bank, let's see, and Boston Capital Real Estate Advisors as well. So I've been a licensed real estate broker in Massachusetts and New Hampshire for about 15 years, a little over 15 years. Personally transacted well in excess of 21 million square feet of real estate, primarily industrial and office product as well. Excuse me. Of which 14 million square feet of that is in New Hampshire and sort of northern Massachusetts. Also done transactions and worked with clients from as far away as the Netherlands and done transactions in Mexico, Texas, Oregon, and a lot of transactions and a lot of acquisitions in the mid-Atlantic states as well. I also have personal ownership interest in several commercial properties, not only in Concord, but also Bedford, Portsmouth, and also have some other development projects. In one specifically in Portsmouth that is about 6 months away from final delivery. So again, just going through that so that you understand who I am, that I obviously I'm a partner, a little bit biased perhaps, but have been around long enough to know the markets. And to that end, when we look at the Concord industrial market, as it's, no market is specific, it's not in its own microcosm. You have to really look at, especially within commercial real estate, you have to look at it not just within the city of Concord, but you also have to take into consideration what's going on with real estate picket, whether it's industrial, whether it's office or retail, what's going on sort of within the industry, but also within the state and the region. And when we take a look at New Hampshire specifically, depending on who you talk to and what metrics you're looking at, and these numbers aren't coming just from our own internal counts, but somewhere between the New Hampshire industrial market consists of between 60 and 72 million square feet of total industrial product that's been constructed. Depending on the metrics, and some firms don't include buildings less than 25,000 square feet. Some include others. So that's the total market. When you look at currently what's out there and vacant in the state of New Hampshire, it's 4.2 million square feet of vacant industrial space. So a lot of that came online within the last probably 2.5 years. Pre-pandemic or during the pandemic, it was really tough to find 100,000 square feet. Most of it was out in the Seacoast, 121 Technology, out in Durham. That was about the only building that could accommodate large-scale, industrial requirements. Pandemic came, there was a rush to, and I think a lot of it was justified, to build more industrial so that there'd be more onshoring. Well, that's sort of created now an oversupply. There's just an excess of about 1 million square feet in southern New Hampshire. By southern New Hampshire, I mean sort of hooks it south, especially Manchester out to the seacoast. 1 million square feet of true high bay, really nice, brand new industrial product that is sitting vacant, and some of it's been sitting vacant for a long period of time. Currently looking at acquiring a couple of those buildings for some clients, buildings that were not initially available for purchase, only for lease. Some of those owners that own some of these properties are now very willing to sell. So,
Yes. But just so for apples to apples,
sure,
because you're talking a lot of numbers here, but how do you convert that if you were trying to compare that to the residential vacancy rate? So you're saying if there's the industrial vacancy rate on a square foot basis,
probably around 5.9%.
If you compared it to the total industrial available.
Yes. Yeah, which also notes, I think Cushman and Wakefield, a colleague of ours, noted that that's kind of a very high metric within the industrial field.
I mean, historically.
Historically, yes. Yeah. Usually it's a lot lower. In the state of New Hampshire, never really overbuilt industrial. It's never really overbuilt in office product either. Office product is not going to be built for a very long period of time. Industrial, overbuilt a bit, just within the state. It's not just within the state. When you look at a lot of companies that are, where's the demand? The demand for anything that's industrial right now is south of Manchester. You get some in Manchester, but a lot of it's south. And what are the reasons for that? Housing and staff. People can't find housing, can't find employees. So a lot of them are pushing towards, either coming over the border from Mass to escape some of the Mass taxes, or, moving towards the south because they have the better odds of finding staff. Let's see. So the other thing to keep in mind is, I have my notes here, but there's well in excess of 1 million square feet that has already been approved and is shovel ready that is on hold because of this large amount of industrial vacancy now. Flatley Company they could build 1 million square feet in Merrimack, and they're kind of waiting for a large anchor tenant, and it's not a lot out there. So what we're really looking at is within the next 24 months, we'll probably have in excess of 5.2 million square feet of available space. Now,
in Concord or in southern New Hampshire generally?
So Concord, you have somewhere, depending on whether you're, again, metrics, right? Are you looking at 5,000 square feet and above? I'll say the greater Concord area, meaning Concord, Bow, Pembroke. You probably have right now 250 to 300,000 square feet, somewhere in that range. I'm aware of potential building of another potential 100 to 125,000 square feet coming online within the next 24 months. That's not being built, but coming back to the market. Just looking at so I'll leave it at that without getting too much deeper into it. So one of the things that also play into this is what we call absorption rate. So I know I'm going in a little bit of the weeds here, but I think it's important to understand sort of the health or lack thereof of the industrial market. And understand, I love industrial. I've been doing industrial for 30 years, a little over, and I love manufacturing. I love industrial. It's what I know. It's what I love. So absorption rate measures how quickly available space is absorbed or leased or sold within a period of time. Typically, we measure it annually. So with 5.2 million square feet, it would take roughly 9 to 17 years. Again, whether it's 300,000 square feet absorbed annually or 500,000 square feet. New Hampshire, traditionally, somewhere between 300 and 500,000 square feet is absorbed per year. So just existing inventory, somewhere between 9 and 17 years to absorb that. So now, one of the other things too is that when you look at Concord, without getting too far into the weeds as to sort of how the markets contract and expand during periods of economic growth and contraction. New Hampshire sort of lags Massachusetts. I always think of it as sort of concentric rings that as the economy expands, it pushes further north, and it also contracts faster. It's sort of like the tide. It contracts faster as once the economy sort of hiccups, then growth sort of comes back. Which is one of the reasons why Concord has never been overbuilt from a perspective of office product or industrial. So industrial absorption rates in Concord are going to be substantially slower than southern New Hampshire, and a lot of that is because of housing and because of employee bases. I'm aware, I'll just leave it here. I'm aware of 2 manufacturing companies that are looking south because of employee staffing, and employee staffing is impacted by a lack of housing. So there is more housing and there are more employees south of Manchester and south. So that is a very real concern.
Dan, when we wrap up, would you just share with the board what industrial, if a 50,000 square foot industrial building were built on that site, what would it sell for in the market?
What would it sell for in the market? The site itself?
No, if you built the building,
the
it'd be
building?
$100 a foot in that range, or 150.
So your cost to construct it is going to be somewhere between $125 and $150 a square foot based on. Yeah, so would it sell for that? I wouldn't put my money into it.
So you're saying you don't think it would be economically viable to?
It really isn't. It really isn't. When you sort of look at the unique characteristics of that parcel, it's 40 acres, as Attorney Cronin mentioned, but it's surrounded by inconsistent wetlands, right? So if you look at it, it's sort of like fingers, and somewhere in the middle you can build, and then you can't access rail because you have wetlands on one side, and you could put maybe 50,000 square feet, but again, to Attorney Cronin's point, you don't have a sufficient laydown area or yard space, which more and more industrial companies want to see.
So that would also imply that if it was built, if it wouldn't sell for as much, would the assessment be greater than a residential? I mean, would the
No,
value of
I
it
don't,
be
I
greater?
don't think it would be, no. No, and you have some numbers on the.
Yeah, I mean,
so.
even if it's sold at 200 a foot, which sounds like it's not likely, and it would cost you more to build it, you know, you're looking at a $10 million value for assessment. Your ratio is about 64.4%. It's a small fraction of what you get with housing, maybe 20% of it. I have some numbers, calculations that I can share with you a little bit
Can
later.
I ask one more question?
Yes.
Because I know you're very enthusiastic and you want to tell us more.
I'll stop. I'll dial it back. I'll dial it back.
Would putting residential housing here in this industrial area, would that devalue the surrounding industrial property? Would it make it less attractive to other industrial users who might not want to move into an area and create that sort of conflict in uses?
I don't believe so, and I'm not saying that because I'm certainly have a vested interest in this, but when you look at the sort of the land parcel itself, it's buffered on all sides, right? The only impact, the highways on one side, and we have 60-foot bluffs and a substantial amount of wetlands between this parcel and other parcels nearby. Really no impact there, and frankly, in some respects, I would think that there's it would help supply employees, one to Merchants Way and to the other industrial companies in the area. So
thank you.
Yes, from a developer's perspective, industrial is not feasible because of the unique characteristics of this site.
Coupled with the cost of putting in the roadway over and above just the construction of the industrial.
Right.
So
You're going to have to put the roadway anyway, right?
Right.
Right, but it makes sense from an from the residential standpoint, but not from the industrial standpoint. And there's the hardship, is that it's zoned industrial, but it is not feasible to use that land for industrial because it won't fit on that lot, and if you built it, you couldn't lease it to support the debt service on it, and you couldn't sell it to get your money back for what you built it on. So it's really zoned for a use that's not applicable for what could be done there. However, for residential, we get all the benefits, as I stated, with residential, and it becomes economically viable to be able to do a residential development, as we suggested.
Yeah, even if the roadway existed there today, it still would not be viable from my perspective.
To do industrial.
To do industrial, right? Just the footprint's too small. Usually, when you look at developing industrial, it's not the rule of thumb, but it's one that most developers look at. It's like to build industrial and have it be viable, you need about 100,000 square feet to build that economy of scale to make it work.
And is this back 40 already its own lot?
Yes.
Yes.
And if it were combined with other lots, would that make industrial more feasible?
I don't believe so because of I don't believe so. You meaning the south, what we've referred to as the South 95?
Yeah.
That additional lane. I don't believe so. It still has some wetlands, I believe, that kind of come around to the south where it abuts.
Okay.
Yeah.
To your knowledge, when was the last time there was a new construction of an industrial nature of this approximate scope or larger in Concord or say the Concord area?
Of industrial? Or
Yeah, has there been a major new development of industrial anytime recently in this area?
Not in Concord, not that I'm aware of. Yeah. I could be forgetting something, but no, the majority of
I'm sure someone will correct you if
I'm
you're
sure
wrong.
someone will, yeah, I have no doubt. I have no doubt to that.
Because if what you're saying is true for this site, that it should be true roughly, I mean, there's some differences.
There's some planned, right? So we know that there's some planned over off of Integra, but the majority of new construction, when you look at some of the major players that sort of bumped into the New Hampshire market that hadn't been there for years, post-pandemic, they're like, wait a second, New Hampshire's perfect for growth. Those spaces, those either constructed developments or planned, are all low south.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Next, I'm going to call up the project engineer, Mr. Roberge. One of the questions in the staff report was no request for relief from the road. Good point, and that's intentional. We're here just to get a classification of multifamily. There's a number of different options with the road, whether it be a boulevard, different access, emergency access from other sites. As many of you know, that the length of cul-de-sac initially was designed by pumper trucks, the distance of hoses, which somewhat is obsolete. This will have water available there for firefighting purposes, and it will be sprinklered. So.
And it's a planning regulation, not a zoning regulation,
Planning
right?
regulation.
That's
But there's a question about it, but that's something that we would deal with at a later date. I just wanted Ed to come up and talk to you a little bit about the unique configuration of this property and the pocketed wetlands that Dean mentioned, where that's within his expertise.
Mr. Roberge, do you
Thank you.
promise to tell the truth and nothing but?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Ed Roberge. I'm a civil engineer with Stantec. I'll give you my address if you need that. 47 Hampshire Hills Drive in Bow. You talked about the site a little bit, and I like the question about the kind of the configuration of the lot, and that's what is unique. And it's interesting that we call it the North 40 because, you know, we started the project, as Kevin mentioned already, a little over 2 years ago. And it started as an evaluation of industrial uses. And at the same time, the Concord Next program was going through. So we engaged, and we became part of that. We engaged with the city planning, engineering, all the life safety groups, the development team, to look at what options were there and what was the direction that Concord Next was looking at, which was really a mixed-use approach. And the hearings that we participated in, we created this broad public engagement, was to really look at what people were interested in doing there, which was mixed use. So when we looked at that site originally, and we put a 50,000 square foot model on there for an industrial use. And with the limitations, the bluff, and I know the graphic was up here before, we did full boundary survey, we did wetland survey. There is, of all of the, you know, if I include the larger parcel to the south of it, which is really wetland, nearly wetland free, all of the wetlands are really bordering around the bluffs. So the bluffs on the Burnham Brook side, which is to the north, the bluffs at the river, and the reservation of space for the eventual Whitney Road extension right-of-way is along that, we'll call it the westerly approach to the site. And then all of those wetlands wrap around the backside to the south. So it actually kind of creates this border, this natural wetland border between the two parcels. So if you were thinking about consolidation or expansion of the 40 area into the larger 95-acre south parcel, you wouldn't be able to do it. So that's what's unique about that in a sense. And we really tried hard to look at different options and the laydown space, just the manufacturing. If you're looking at a manufacturer, or there were some other options that were looked at previously on that site as well. And they just never came to fruition, for whether it was market supported, whether it was cost that was prohibitive, or if it just wasn't going to work out. So that was our focus, to look at the scope and the reasonability of building an industrial solution at that site, and it just wasn't working out. The layout that we show now, it is a concept layout. We did review that within our public engagement program. It seemed to be pretty popular, well supported, has a mix of use, and that was more appropriately because we were able to fit that within the environmental constraints of that site. And we'd be proud to say that we could build that without having extensive environmental impacts, which is really being more mindful of the site as it sits, more open space with better opportunities. So I think that's...
Yeah, and just touch on some of where those, I think you explained it, the configurations of the pocketed wetlands are the entirety of the property, correct?
Yeah, when you look at in your package, you do see the layout concept that we have here. And as you're looking at that, you know, we're trying to create this. First of all, there's a really good natural barrier or buffer between all of the abutting properties. The railroad track is along, we're going to just call it along the west side of the property, and there's a whole run of wetlands that kind of border and make it, you know, without an avoidance or with a wetland impact, you could probably connect to the rail. But we were trying to stay away from that naturally. So that entire east side and half of the south side of the parcel is all wetlands. And that we did, we wanted to make sure that we had full survey to understand that a little bit better. You know, the Merrimack River is, and the bluff is, that's there. So we're set back. So the road, our access road that's shown on the concept is essentially the route of the water main is an easement through that property today. That's the map line of a future street of what they would call the Whitney Road extension. So keeping that in place, this project would look to build the portion of that Whitney Road extension dedicated to the city, and it would be there for the next extension if it were to ever connect. The goal of the Whitney Road extension plan, and that's from years back, was to connect southerly to eventually to Sewell's Falls Road. So you can see how constrained the middle of this site is. We've put in the mix of a lot of green space. Our lot coverage is far less than what an industrial use would allow up here. And really this development team is not so much worried about the unit numbers. It's more of how does this fit within this unique environment. And you can see the open space. We've been directed to create as comfortable and as open space a development as we could. So we think that this blends and uses the site to its fullest, where we struggled with an industrial use here.
But
Thank you.
you kind of, I think at the beginning you didn't seem concerned, but the city is very concerned about the 4,000 foot dead end street, and you're saying that they really shouldn't be so concerned because it's based on outdated technology with the fire suppression. Is that?
I would say part of that regulation of a 1,000 foot cul-de-sac was for not only public safety and getting access to what would be residentials or really anything to support. It dates back from before, we'll even say, residential fire suppression. We see that a lot now. And the length of what hose length a fire truck could carry in, or even how an ambulance could get access if a tree fell. And so there's been a number of cases and studies that have been done in a number of communities that look at that. Some have wavered from that requirement because there's other new technology that would allow, like residential fire suppression, like fire alarm systems, like redundant boulevard type roadways where you have two roadways approaching. We reviewed this pretty closely with planning and with the city's fire marshal, just to understand what were some of those constraints. So I do think that there's a solution that can be made. That is part of the planning board purview, and we understand that, and we'd work through that. But from Whitney Road, the Whitney Road as it exists today is about 1,500 feet long. And we would need, based on the concept that you're seeing, is about another 1,500 feet of roadway to get to the driveways. And the redundant driveways into the site was purposeful. The city's fire marshal was concerned, wanted to make sure that there just wasn't one single roadway access into this development. And that's why it's shaped sort of the way it is, to have the redundancy from the public right-of-way when built. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you all set before we address the 5 criteria?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just the one thing I would like to add is with industrial, we did, when we were having issues and thought that there may be some pushback and the desire was to, maybe try to find an industrial use for this property, we did start looking at it, and everyone that we talked to just said, no, the site is too constrained, so it just won't work. So that was just the last thing I wanted to address.
Well, everyone you talk to except for the city.
Well, right, but the city, if the city wants to buy and build industrial, well, I guess we can have that conversation, but we haven't been approached with that.
With respect to the 5 criteria, I know you've spent a lot of time on this case, and we have some information in the application. I won't read everything in detail, but I'll summarize them just so the record is complete. With the public interest and spirit and intent of the ordinance, prongs are generally the same standard. I think Attorney Spector Morgan cited it in some prior cases, and it's absolutely correct. I think Farrar versus Keene has been the long standard for those two, and it's whether or not, if the variance is granted, will there be a change in the essential character of the neighborhood to a marked or substantial degree. Here, I think those two prongs are real easy. I think the legislature took care of it for you with 672.1. It's told you that, one, affordable housing is of important interest not only to the community but to the state as a matter of legislative prerogative. Also, there's some focus on units in Concord, and kind of, well, we don't want it because we might have enough if all of these get built. I don't believe that's the appropriate standard. In Britton versus Chester, which is a Supreme Court case, a multifamily project that was attempting to be built in Chester that was denied and went up to the Supreme Court. They're saying when you're looking at the public interest prong, when you're looking at the variance, you can't just look at your own community. You can't put a moat around your community and analyze it from within. You have to look at the broad needs of the area and the state at large. And I think it was pretty clear to everyone that there is a need for housing. There's a critical need for affordable housing. And this project has a higher percentage than most, maybe any, that are currently on the books or have been built other than the exclusive catch products. The other thing on the public interest, I didn't get the staff report that long ago, but it was easy to get on YouTube and do a couple of searches, and I have some important points that is easy to find. At the Davis Ridge ribbon cutting, Mayor Champlin praised Ketch at various points during his remarks, offered a short story about an individual who called him and wound up sharing a story of how they were struggling to find an apartment for their mother, and praised the staff of Ketch. The mayor starts his comment and praises Ketch throughout. On YouTube, there's another section. It says, while New Hampshire may have a 1.6 vacancy rate, if I heard the figure correctly, the challenge here in Concord is that our vacant rate is 0.3 or 0.4 on an optimistic day. And that means that all types of housing are critical. There's another one you can find easily. Now, as we search for ways to encourage...
Mr. Cronin?
Yes?
I think the board is pretty clear on how you view the need for housing.
Okay, I just want to make sure that
I think we could move on to other
the record
topics.
complete. There is one great one there, and I'll just touch on it, that talks about how essential the housing is to maintain jobs and the economic base here in Concord, businesses and so forth. But I'll move on from that. Balancing test is the harm to the applicant as the variance is denied versus to the harm to the public if it's been granted. Here we have a piece of land, 40 acres, but has a lot of restrictions in it with the wetlands and the area to build. You could build a 50,000 square foot industrial, but it costs you more to build it than you could get in rent or that you could get to sell. Also for the public, it generates very little in tax revenue, which I will address in a little bit. In terms of this particular property, if the housing is not permitted here, industrial is a non-starter. To ask someone to wait to 28, 30, or maybe beyond to get productive use of their property, we don't think is reasonable and swings the balancing test in favor of building housing on this particular tract. In terms of the value prong, in your packet that was submitted with the application is an opinion from Mr. McKeon, who is looking at apartment impacts to other properties in the area, and he concludes generally that if apartments get built, they generally don't have a factor of diminishment of surrounding properties. Also, you heard from Mr. Navaroli here, who spoke about the industrial pact and responded to some questions about valuation. With respect to the hardship piece, first, is there special conditions? We believe that there are, and the record is supported with the configuration of the lot and the physical features make it difficult to build feasible industrial. Yeah, you could build it, but it wouldn't be feasible to build it in that way and get any reasonable return or economic benefit. When you look at the fair and substantial relationship of the ordinance to this particular property and this particular project, really doesn't make it fair to do industrial there if it's not feasible? And is this use reasonable? We believe creating affordable housing of this magnitude is a reasonable use. And I think that covers our 5 criteria. I just want to touch, and again, I won't read into the record verbatim. We do have the McKeon letter. There also, I believe, was submitted from Mr. Farrelly. He's a pretty well-known real estate expert. He put a letter, it was in with the application.
Yes, we saw it.
Yeah, you saw that, so I won't belabor that. Mark Fougier, who's an expert, kind of an economic expert, he does a lot of this analysis. He took a look at the project and the site and did some analysis. His projection that this particular project, if approved, would generate a tax revenue of $353,964 if it was approved. On the industrial side, he had a number based on $100 a square foot for value. At 50,000 is $5 million, and that's roughly in the $80,000 range for taxes. And that's using that 64.4% ratio, and only the city component of the tax, which is just under $10, 9 and some change. He also took a look at the school issue, and I wasn't aware of it, and he said that these kids at this particular property, they would go to the Merrimack Valley School District and not to Concord, and there's declining or stabilized capacity there. He talked to the superintendent, and there's room for the kids up there. So in that sense, that works. Also, Peter Bartash, who was with Port One Companies, he's a pretty well-known industrial developer. He's the one that's doing that big project at the toll booth. Probably go by it and all you see is sign there in the big hole with the site work. That's approved for a 500,000 square foot tenant that's going to go into that site. And he submitted a letter. Again, I won't read it in detail. It's 2 pages. He talks about the industrial piece, and just the bullet points are challenging site configuration and wetlands, infrastructure development costs, market viability and lease rates, proximity to transportation and industrial clusters, surplus of competitive industrial land, limited scalability for future expansion, and lack of synergy with surrounding land uses. So that concludes our presentation. The only questions that I would ask as I was running out the door to come up here, I saw one letter, I think, from McLean Law Firm from the existing incinerator site. And we did take a look at 4 other different Windway sites and their proximity to housing, all roughly in the same area as here. And if there's someone that's here to speak, I would assume they would confirm that this site works in compliance with EPA and DES regulations, and as it's currently operating, it presents no threat to public health, safety, or welfare. I think that's evidenced by all of the development that's occurred around that area and the hundreds and hundreds of people that go in and out of there every day. So thank you very much.
Can I ask a question? Yes, sure. Something the city mentioned in their papers that I don't think you touched on, and they didn't dwell on it, but it caught my attention, is you obviously don't own the site, right? It's cooperative owns the site, and apparently the city of Concord is the largest shareholder of that cooperative. So,
Right.
So A, do you have authority for this application? Then B, even if you don't, could Concord just block the city just block this whole project if they want, just by not? I mean, how are you going to get the land to develop this?
It's under agreement. There's an agreement to purchase, option agreement. I read that a few times till I understood it.
Okay.
This co-op is comprised of a number of different towns and cities, municipalities, Concord being one of them. Concord voted against granting permission, but they did not prevail. The other members of the cooperative carried the vote and granted permission to come forward.
Oh, so they vote in proportion to whatever their share is.
Whatever many
Okay,
units. we all
so
get a
you
vote.
were voted approval to
That's correct.
purchase this and to bring this application?
And that's a requirement of bringing the application.
Okay, thank you.
But a really good question. And when I looked at it too, I was kind of concerned.
Any other questions? Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, thank you.
Could you just leave one packet for the record with those wind waste and the bar?
Sure, if you'd give that to,
I think you have a lot of them already, but.
yeah, I think we do. Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in opposition to it? Mr. Schweiker.
Do I have to sign in again?
No, I think you've signed in before.
Yes.
Yeah, you're okay.
You're identified, and you're still under solemn oath to tell the truth. What would you like us to know?
And it's my understanding, under the rules of the board, I get half as long to rebut what they spoke.
Yeah, could I get back to you on that?
Okay, I'll try and be a little bit shorter.
Okay.
The first thing is that as far as industrial uses, he's only talking about, an industrial building with garage doors and so forth. I think there are other industrial uses of this that this is a unique parcel of land for. Number one, there is a rail line. It is not easy to access, but if you've ever seen those pictures of those driverless trucks zooming around our highways, is that really something you want to see? We now have a major railroad located in Concord, New Hampshire. It has two things that are very valuable. They have what they call positive train control. You know where every train on that whole railroad is at every moment. And they also have precision scheduling, where when you have a load on that railroad, they book it all the way through to where it goes, just like they do with the packages and whatever. So I think that what we're looking at in the future, when someone finally wises up, is we will start having, instead of those driverless semi-trailers on the interstates, we'll be having trains going around on railroads, but they won't be what you think of as a train. There'll be an individual unit, probably electrically powered, because those heavy batteries are no big deal on a railroad. You can charge them up anywhere along the way. So I think that here we have a place with rail access, and using it to build apartments, which have no benefit to that, is a sad mistake. And if we have to preserve this thing a few years until the technology comes in for rail access, let's do it, because essentially you cannot build any more railroads. They've got to be straight, they've got to be level. You can't just build them anywhere. So essentially all the railroads we have are the ones that are here already. So saving land next to railroads should be really valuable to you. The second thing we have here is we have electric power infrastructure. There used to be a power plant at Sewell's Falls. And so if we were to take this area and as an industrial use, put in wind turbines to catch the wind going up the river, we were to put in solar panels to generate electricity, that would be a use that would be very consistent with what's there and would preserve a lot of the environment and would have really no bad characteristics. Whereas, once again, this is something you can't just do anywhere. If you were to put wind turbines or solar panels some places, you wouldn't have a power line nearby. You'd have to build one. There's a thing called Northern Pass. They never got approval for it. You can't just build power lines anywhere. So preserving land that's got access to power lines and access to rail for industrial use is a good idea. We're not talking about some building with roll-up garage doors. So, I mean, that's the key side, I think, of why this land should not just be turned into houses. There's been a whole lot of developers pulling this bait and switch in Concord. Once they said, well, you can put mixed housing and commercial. Well, rail yards, well, yeah, we'll do it. We'll postpone all the commercial till later and just build the housing. You think that commercial is ever going to get built? No, they're probably coming to get more housing. There's one out on 106. They didn't even put any commercial on it. It's only housing. These people want to get rich off their housing and don't really care what happens to us. I think that if Trump really onshores this stuff like he says he's going to, that industrial land and commercial land could vaporize quickly. So, it's only fair to think about, we're not saying you can't do it for 30 years. We're saying about,
I think we take your point.
Okay. And the other key thing is, I believe that land's in current use. They're paying essentially nothing in taxes on it. So holding it is not a huge expense to them. And now let's go to the other side of this. That I wish that gentleman from New Hampton who wants to put 60,000 units of housing in Concord, put it in New Hampton instead. They've got a whole lot more vacant space than we do. And there's, really no money in it. Because if you think about it, he's talking about $350,000.
Mr. Schweiger, these are all points well taken, but they don't bear directly on the problem we have before us this evening, and it is getting late.
They bear directly on what he said, and I believe I have the right to respond to it. He's talking about generating $1,700 a unit in taxes for those things. Do you know what it costs to educate a kid in this city? I think you're going to discover there's more than kids more than 10% of those units, that tax is going to be negative and not positive. So, this is not a big money maker. This is going to raise the price to the residents here by building all this housing. And, the last thing is, should we say that he's being, I don't want to use a nasty word, but I think calling this housing affordable is kind of wishy-washy. Let's say that they said, okay, there's 600 new jobs in that Merchants Way. We want you to restrict the housing to the workers in Merchants Way, and you want to only charge 30% of their pay in rent for that housing. That's what I call affordable housing. You think there's any hope they would say it? Of course not. Catch sells cheaper housing than other people, but a friend of mine was a park ranger in the summer and a substitute teacher in the winter, could not afford Catch housing because it's not for poor people. It's kind of for, middle income people. So I think that, if they're talking about affordable housing, let's make it really affordable. Let's say, okay, guys, we want to see that stuff that if you're a full-time cashier at Market Basket, they can rent one of your apartments for 30% of their pay.
Thank you, Mr. Schweiger.
One last thing. As far as the cul-de-sac, I think that Mr. Roberge maybe has the right idea, that maybe they need to be looking at building that boulevard, because not that long ago, there was somebody trying to cross North Main Street, got hit by a car, and that road was shut down for 7 hours. If that's the only way in, can you shut down a road for 7 hours? So we need to, think about those long cul-de-sacs. Thank you. And that's less than 50%.
Yes, it is. Thank you, and good evening. Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard in opposition to this appeal? Please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Brennan Bork. I am from 66 High Street in Pennacook.
You swear to tell the truth?
I do.
What would you like us to know, Mr. Bork?
Hold on. Let me finish signing in. I oppose this variance tonight due to the fact that there's not enough housing. They've went from a 900 unit plan to a 100 unit plan, and I don't think that's enough. I think we need more housing, and I was in favor of this plan when it was the 900 unit plan. I thought the retail in the retail space that would have been brought would have been great for the town of Pennacook. I think it would have brought things for young people to do. It would have brought housing for people, and they offered to put in bike paths and in a kayak section for people. And with this new proposal, it seems like it's just a watered down proposal of the last plan they wanted to do. But I would like to see you guys deny this variance and have them come back with more units and a project that looks more like the last project, and for you guys to consider more housing and to consider, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard? Please come forward.
Michelle Samard, Mountain Road.
Swear to tell the truth?
The other gentleman already mentioned the taxes, so I won't really say too much about that, other than that, the tax revenue was mentioned, but then is offset by the cost to the school, increased police, increased fire, road maintenance, assuming that that's not going to be a private road. Based on the staff notes that are posted in the agenda, more than 94% of the city is zoned residential. So there's really no reason to rezone more of the industrial. Also, we have over 2,300 housing units in development right now, which is, substantial. According to this, it's a 12% increase. My concern is, one, the impact to the residents on Mountain Road. Traffic already is a huge issue there, made worse by the recent four-way stop sign that was put in. And I know that some of the people that live in that area bought because of the more rural area of Concord, outside of the city. Having that development with all the increased traffic is going to really make a big impact for the people on that road, and also on Hoyt Road going over to exit 17. So I'm just opposed to the variance because, I don't think we need to give away the small amount, 6% of industrial zoning that we currently have when we already have 94% residential. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard? Any comment from code enforcement? Matt, are you the comment from code enforcement, or?
I am tonight.
Okay.
Oh, boy.
You swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Would you identify yourself for the record, please?
My name is Matt Walsh. I am the Deputy City Manager for Community Development in the City of Concord, New Hampshire. Thank you for your time and your service. I know it's late. I will try not to repeat anything that you've heard tonight, but there were some comments. I'm here really to supplement the staff report, which I wholeheartedly endorse what's in the staff report, and I would note that staff reports are a collaborative effort, so it's not always one person that prepares those, whether it's for the zoning board, planning board, city council, or anybody else. There is a long history with this particular site. I'm not going to go into it between negotiations with the developer about a public-private partnership, but I did note, I would note that in the staff report, it discusses that the developer was advised how to go forward with the zoning amendment, and that zoning amendment process is governed by 2810-4 of the zoning ordinance, and it requires an analysis of the master plan. And the city's current master plan, which is the 2030 master plan, so 2030 is 5 years from now, it calls for industrial development at this location and has done so consistently for decades for long-term planning purposes. So it's not necessarily about what works in the market today, but is planning for the city's long-term needs and making sure that whatever that might be is our infrastructure is appropriately sized and planned for as well to support that development in this location, which historically has been industrial. So I would note that for the board, I don't know why the applicant has decided to go the variance route. I don't know if they feel that the master plan analysis might be inconvenient for making their case for housing at this location, but I suspect that might be what's going on. The property is owned by the co-op. The city is a former member of the cooperative. We withdrew ourselves. However, we still have a land interest. We have an ownership interest actually in this parcel. So when or if the property actually sells, we'll get about 1/3 of the revenue because that's what the city's owed, even though we're no longer technically a member of the co-op. We did vote against extension of the purchase option agreement that the co-op has for this property with the developer. And we also voted, we did not support the variance application. This property is 42.43 acres. Although there are wetlands on the property, there is a sizable area of contiguous developable land in the center of the site, obviously, where the developer's talking about is 194 units of housing. The property has no road frontage. There is no road there. But it does have, when a road goes in, excellent access to US Route 4 and I-93. In fact, about 4,700 feet away from I-93, so it's less than a mile. This property is very large by industrial standards in Concord. If you look at 2 Whitney Road, which is where Concord Crossing is, that's 11 acres. If you look at 6 Whitney Road, which is Lakes Region 10 event, I'll go back to 2 Whitney Road. 2 Whitney Road's 11 acres, it's got 70,000 square feet on it. 6 Whitney Road, Lakes Region 10 event, 4.5 acres, has industrial development on it. And then you look at the incinerator property, which is 23.8 acres. So when you think about this 40 acres for industrial, it's a large site. And I would note that wetlands are not unusual on properties in New Hampshire, and it's not atypical of the other properties that are surrounding it, nor is the lack of road frontage at the moment. I would also note that the current owner, which is the Regional Solid Waste Cooperative, was going to develop 61,000 square feet of facility there with 122 parking spaces. But that project never went forward. And I would also note that that property, there was going to be a connection to the railroad to serve that development. Rail access is highly unusual in Concord, and this makes this site unique and would support long-term future development. We already talked.
Can I ask how they were going to do that with the wetlands?
I've got the plan right here if you want to see it.
I would love to see it.
That was going to be an industrial use?
Yep, it was going to be a recycling facility developed by the co-op. And may I approach, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
That is the property. This is the rail spur that was going to come into the property.
Yep.
So
Okay.
they were showing the rail.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Would you pass that along?
I absolutely will. Yep. Yep.
And so I thought that was important to bring to the board's attention, was not in the staff memo. Master plan we've already talked about. I would note that the master plan talks about industrial uses in this area. Office park is discussed, but office park was not discussed at this particular property. It's still called for just industrial because of its proximity to the incinerator. So therefore, we were anticipating that there would be a more intensive industrial use there because of the neighbor that is there. It's an incinerator which operates 365 days a year and burns trash. So that's that. The master plan talks about land banking. And again, this area has been reserved for future industrial development. Concord will continue to grow. Our economic base and our opportunities for economic expansion need to be preserved. We need to make sure we have opportunities to diversify our economic base. So therefore, we are trying to keep industrial opportunities available in Concord, and we'll talk about the amount of industrial land here shortly. I will also say that there is industrial development that continues to happen in Concord. I would note that there has been a 350,000 square foot facility that's been permitted on Integra Drive that is going to be hopefully developed by Pitco. They recently extended all of their permits and approvals for that. They have hired a construction manager according to the architect that's working on that project, and they're in the process of bidding construction of it now. So there is demand for industrial development in Concord. I will also tell you we've missed out on opportunities because of not having ready to go or an ample supply of industrial land available. So things like the Liquor Commission warehouse that ended up in Bow a few years ago on Route 3A. So there's a need there. There continues to be interest for economic development. There was a biomedical company that was looking to do a campus here. And unfortunately, and they may still continue to look to do a campus here. This site might be a good use for them, given its uniqueness and aesthetic beauty. So it's about that. It's about economic diversity. It's about preserving future job opportunities. It's about being able to continue to supply industrial opportunities to the community. Moving on to zoning. This is in the staff report, but I think it bears worth repeating. A portion of this property is already zoned residential open space along the Merrimack River to protect the river. There was some discussion in the applicant's submissions about environmental concern of putting in, industrial use on this property because of the river. There's a 150-foot buffer on the river. There are other setbacks, and in fact, you can't build industrial next to the river because the portion of the site that butts the river is zoned residential open space. So I want to make that clear. Concord has 17 zoning districts. Residential is permitted in 14 of the 17 zoning districts. Residential is permitted in our town, which is about 64 square miles of land. Residential is permitted in 60.2 square miles of that, or just under 95% of the city. There are ample opportunities to develop residential housing in the city of Concord, and there will be going forward, and there are today. There are only 2.64 square miles of land that is zoned industrial in the city of Concord. That is 4%, I believe. There is only 221 acres of undeveloped raw industrial land in the city of Concord today. That is a very precious resource. There's not a lot of it, and it needs to be preserved for future economic development needs. So I wanted to bring that to the attention of the board, and therefore it may be factoring into the board's consideration of public interest with all of that. Relative to housing, again, 95% of the city you can do a residential development in. There are 2,352 units of housing that have been either permitted or under construction right now in Concord today. That will increase the city's housing stock by 12%. It will increase the population by about 5,500 people. And the city will need to serve those people. I'm proud to report to the board that on December 17th of 2024, the city was designated as a housing champion by the state of New Hampshire. We were one of 18 communities that were selected, and there are 234 communities in New Hampshire, by the way. One of 18 that was selected because of how friendly the city of Concord is to development, particularly residential development. We have regulations that allow residential development in 95% of our city. We've been involved in public-private partnerships to build housing. We have gotten community development block grants for housing. We have sold land to people like Catch to build affordable housing and Caleb. We've done many things. So this aspersion that Concord's not doing enough for housing, I think, is unfounded. I would go a step further. So I appreciate the reference to RSA 672:1 and the Britton versus Chester case. But I would go one step further. So in the wake of both of those things, there is an RSA 36:47(2), and that requires the Central New Hampshire Regional Planning Commission to do a regional housing needs assessment every 5 years. And there are, just for reference, Concord is in the Central New Hampshire Regional Planning Commission district. There are 20 communities that make up that district. We're one of them. In 2020, Concord had 36.5% of the total population for the region. We had just under 38% of the total housing stock. We had 58% of the affordable housing in the region. So this concept of more affordable housing, the city is very supportive of. Again, we've done public-private partnerships, gotten community development block grants, sold land for affordable housing developments. The Tannery site in Pennacook is a great example. That's 54 units of affordable housing. So I wanted to bring that to the board's attention, that we had 58% of the affordable housing, even though we had 38% of the housing stock and 36.5% of the population. There are 8 communities in central New Hampshire, the central New Hampshire region, that have no affordable housing, none. And those communities are Bradford, Chichester, Deering, Dunbarton, Loudoun, Salisbury, Sutton, and Webster. I would encourage every developer to look to those communities to build housing there, because they are not carrying their responsibility for providing affordable housing in the region, unlike Concord. I'll go further. Since 2020, so those are 2020 data, there have been 373 units of income housing, of affordable housing built in Concord since then, and there's another 132 units that are going to come online shortly. So housing's a regional issue. Concord has its fair share of affordable housing per that statute, 36:47(2). We have lots of housing and development to address what is a statewide issue. And again, there are 234 communities in New Hampshire. Concord's doing its fair share. I don't know if the others are, but we certainly are. In Concord, while we are very much pro-housing, it's not in the public interest to consider maybe using this precious little remaining area of industrial land for more housing development. Because this site is about approximately 25% of the remaining 221 acres of industrial land that we have left. So that is important. Neighborhood context is another thing I wanted to touch on quickly. This will create an island of residential surrounded by industrial. And it will be separated from all other residential neighborhoods. We do have concerns about the access, which we'll talk to about in a second. It directly abuts an incinerator and other industrial properties. This circumstance will inherently create land use conflicts in the future. It will thwart future industrial development. People will not want this in their backyard, future industrial development in their backyard when they move into those 194 units. If the incinerator ever needs to expand because that's where Concord's trash goes today and will probably continue to go in the future. If they ever need to expand, I would predict that these 194 units would probably not be in favor of something like that. So I'm worried about our ability to provide that critical public service. Again, creating land use conflicts and is inherently something that the zoning ordinance does not encourage or the master plan encourages, and I think that's also part of your criteria for reviewing your variance. We've already talked about the environmental issues a little bit. Public safety. Public safety is a considerable issue. I know the applicant is going to punt that to the planning board if this variance is granted. I can tell you you're going to put the planning board in a difficult position because this would be a neighborhood at the end of a 3/4 mile long cul-de-sac, and we will have concerns about public safety, whether it's fire, police, emergency medical responses, ambulances. It's not just about building fires. Just as a sidebar, most of the Concord Fire Department's book of business is emergency transports and ambulances. That's what it is. So we want to make sure we can get there consistently if somebody calls for service and for some unknown reason that road is not passable.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes, sir.
Has the fire department reviewed this plan and made any comment on it?
I am not aware of that as I sit before you today. So those are some of the comments that I wanted to provide to the board. If the board had any questions about any of the analysis that's in the staff report, I'd be happy to try and address that with you, or the city planner can address that, but I'm here if you have any questions.
Questions?
I have a question, and I should recall this, but I don't. Obviously the Market Basket development.
Yep.
That's relatively near there. Was that rezoned? I don't remember us granting a use variance on that. What was that rezoned to accommodate that development?
You did not. So, in accordance with the 2030 master plan, the land use chapter of the master plan called for rezoning that area, which was previously industrial, and expanding it to create the regional shopping opportunity for a regional shopping development there, which is Market Basket. So the property was rezoned by the city council in conjunction with working with the developer through a public-private partnership.
Can you pull up the zoning map again?
So they made it into
there was no
gateway
variance.
district, right?
There was no variance for the Market Basket.
So it had been industrial, but isn't it odd? So the master plan envisioned that area would ultimately be developed into something commercial. So why wasn't the zoning changed at the time of the 2030 master plan? Why did they wait until this project was proposed? Am I getting the timing right?
So, are you still talking relative to the Market Basket site?
Yeah.
So
when was it rezoned? Roughly.
The 2008, so the 2030 master plan, the current master plan we have now is in 2008. I want to say the property was rezoned within the last 5 years, give or take, so probably 2020-ish. And part of it was we were waiting for the right project to come along. And part of it was also a public-private partnership where the city built the infrastructure out there to support that.
But if the whole idea is that the zoning is consistent with the master plan, so we shouldn't change the zoning because that's what the master plan envisioned, why wasn't the what I'm calling the Market Basket property rezoned in 2008 if the plan was that wouldn't be industrial? Why was it left as zoned industrial if you didn't want it industrial then?
Because there was nobody beating down our door in 2008 to develop anything out there. So we were waiting to see what the market would bear.
You want to be flexible.
And when a development project came along that was commercial, which was not industrial, could not be done in an industrial zone, when a commercial project came along, the community as a whole said, okay, this is the type of development we're hoping to do there. It is consistent with our master plan because the master plan called for that area to be this node of commercial, regional commercial, to serve not just Concord but Canterbury, Webster, Boscawen, Salisbury. And so it was rezoned at that time because a developer came to us and said, we want to do this. And we said, that's great. It's consistent with our master plan. We will rezone it because of that. Unlike this particular site, which is called for industrial, and the master plan calls for industrial there. It does not call for residential or any other use.
Okay. Go ahead.
Just in follow-up to what he was saying and an additional answer to your question, it's very typical planning. You have a master plan, a future land use map, and there are areas that are designated for zones that are other than what they are currently zoned, and they're not rezoned as part of the master plan. They're rezoned when development comes in at that. So in answer to your question, you were asking why it wasn't rezoned in 2008 with the master plan.
Yeah.
That's just not the way it's done in the planning world. The rezone doesn't take place as part of the master plan. It takes place when the development comes in.
Interesting. And can I get, this to either one of you, I mean, obviously there's a major difference of opinion here about the feasibility of industrial in this area. I mean, they're suggesting, and obviously you listen to them and you've talked to them many times, they're suggesting it's not presently and in no time in the foreseeable future going to be a economically viable industrial, and even if it was, it would not be nearly the highest and best use of the property. You obviously disagree with that.
So our take on that is there is a master plan update that is proposed to be budgeted in 2026. There will be a review of land use. There will be a review of future land use, and there will be a discussion about what highest and best use of land is. And that is the proper venue to look at what the future of an entire area would be. Also to balance, hey, this is only how much industrial land you have in the city. So do you want to preserve that for future? Not just about today, not about next year, but future as the community continues to grow. And depending on what you want that area to be, what infrastructure is going to be required to serve it. So we can make sure that the Pennacook wastewater treatment plant size appropriately, that we can understand what transportation improvements might be required in East Concord, things of that nature. So if there is and that's a community-based process. And if the community comes forward and says, as part of that master plan update, maybe industrial is not the right thing to do here, or maybe there needs to be industrial on this site next to the incinerator, but maybe we can do residential somewhere else. The venue to do that is the master plan, and that was communicated to the developer, and that's why you've got the letters that are in the report. So that is the proper way of doing that. It should be a community up conversation, not a, hey, the market doesn't work and we want to do residential here at this moment in time. At a moment in time when residential is highly unusual as well because of things that have occurred over the last few years.
Yeah.
I'd like to return briefly, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you go ahead, I'm done.
To the question of, what was I going to return briefly? You go ahead while I think of it.
I think Mark had it. Do you have a question, Mark?
And the incinerator's on the exact next property, right? The abutting property?
Sorry, that again?
The incinerator's on the abutting property?
That's correct. It's, do we have a pointer here? Do I have to get up and point? I'll get up and point.
Yeah, the mouse is pink. Yeah, so we
Okay.
Okay.
That is the outline of the incinerator building.
Okay.
That is the incinerator
Yep.
property.
And that's where the development is, in the yellow. Okay.
Yeah, and their nearest building on their plan is approximately 250 feet from the incinerator property line.
I remembered what I forgot. You mentioned earlier that the procedure for changing the zoning, for asking to change the zoning on a specific site, involves making a case for why you're changing the zoning, your proposed change in the zoning is consistent with the master plan.
Yep.
Do I understand that there's nothing to stop any prospective developer from making such a proposal based on the current master plan?
So the developer, and this was outlined to him in an October 21st letter from me, 2024. There is nothing stopping a developer from asking for a rezoning of a property. But the analysis that's required in Article 2810.4 of the zoning ordinance, there are 7 different criteria that have to be evaluated by the staff in the planning board, and then ultimately a recommendation has to be made to the city council by the planning board. And the first one is the consistency of the proposed zoning amendment with the master plan. And so given the master plan talks about industrial uses at this location and not residential uses or other things, that might be a tough hurdle to get through. You don't know what the planning board would recommend. I don't know what the city council would do. But it is something that would have to be considered as part of a zoning amendment request.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Walsh?
Not to beat a dead horse, I know we all want to go home.
Which we won't.
And I know, I also know we are not the master plan subcommittee 2 years from now, but can I ask one more time why the city isn't pushing back as much on industrial use at this environmentally sensitive riverfront area again?
Because we're not quite sure that's as industrial and environmentally sensitive as it's been discussed.
Okay.
It's been talked about for industrial development here for decades. Okay. The Merrimack River is protected because that section of the site that is what's showed here on the screen and translates there is not exactly, it's not as good. There is a swath of residential open space
I saw that.
land along the protected river.
That, yeah.
And there are wetlands at this site, but we have regulations that protect wetlands.
Right, okay.
So, you know, one could argue that residential at this site could be as potentially environmentally impacting as an industrial development.
Okay.
Buildings are buildings and
Totally.
pavement is pavement. One more thing, Mr. Chair, before I go, because I know you want to go home and we all do, preferably today.
It was kind of on my agenda, yeah.
The Concord Next project was discussed. Concord Next was initiated in, I want to say, 2017. And the scope of that project was not to look at industrial zone land in Concord or commercially zoned areas. It was specifically to residential. So the developer came to the city and said, hey, you're doing Concord Next, we're doing Concord Next. And there's discussion of some concepts in Concord Next. But this area, this industrial land, was never going to be rezoned as part of the Concord Next process because the Concord Next scope of work did not include industrial property. And why did it not include that? Because it would be inconsistent with the master plan.
So that's why there was a discussion of rewriting the zoning without first rewriting the master plan.
So I think in what the attempt was Concord Next was going to try and look at more residential zoning districts specifically and some of the mixed use districts, but the commercial gateway districts, the industrial districts, opportunity court, those were not on the agenda. So, you know, so the concept of this could have been taken care of as part of Concord Next, no. It was to wait to a master plan. There are other industrial sites in Pennacook that also need to be looked at as part of a master plan. I would look at the old Rivco site. Probably not a good industrial site anymore, but needs to be done through a master plan process so we can understand what the community wants, what's appropriate for the market, what the city's long-term economic development needs are, what are economic relative to tax base, job base, all that stuff, infrastructure, so we can make sound public policy.
Can I,
Yes,
I'm
sure.
sorry, but this is obviously a challenging case. Your point, and I think everyone said, well, 94% of the land in Concord is zoned residential. There's very little industrial land, relatively speaking. There's plenty of opportunities to develop residential. But these guys, they're obviously in this business. They're trying to make money. They're not here just for fun. So what? I mean, from your perspective, why aren't they just going on to another area of the city that they could develop? I mean, it kind of strikes me that I mean, if they're rational, there must be a lot of obstacles. They've chosen this site because it seems viable. Do you think they're just stuck on it because they've already put so much into it?
I think, you know, to the credit of Mr. Lacasse and his team, which I have respect for Mr. Lacasse and his team. This is not anything personal whatsoever.
Of course, yeah.
There's been a lot of time and effort and money spent by them on this project over the last couple of years. There are development opportunities in Concord today if they want to explore other development opportunities. We're a town of 64 square miles of land. It's a lot. You can put the city of Manchester and Nashua in Concord if you wanted to, or pretty close to it. There are opportunities there, but I think, you know, they have a purchase and sale agreement on this site. They've been working on it for a number of years, and I don't blame them for trying to salvage some return on their investment for what they've put into it. If that's what their motivation is, I don't know. But I'm here to tell you, you know, the larger picture, which I don't think has been really talked about some of these broader public policy concerns about the lack of available industrial land, how much land is really available for residential. how the city's doing relative to its regional fair share per the Central New Hampshire Regional Planning Commission's needs assessment that's been done for RSA 3647. All of that's been not part of the conversation. And so there's been, there needs to be an understanding of those things so informed decisions can be made.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for your time and your service.
Mr. Cronin, would you like to offer any factual clarification in response to what you've heard?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. There's a question raised as why not pursue the rezoning option. An effort was done to do that. Kevin and his team reached out, asked to meet with the council to discuss it. Council went into executive session, which may have been appropriate at that time, to think about the public-private partnership piece of it, but came out and said we're not interested. They said if it had, we don't want to spend money in a partnership on a road, and if you did some affordable housing, there might be some interest there. They went back to the drawing board, downsized it, put the affordable in as requested, went back and said let's have a conversation about rezoning. They wouldn't meet with them. I went into executive session again, whether appropriate or not, and came out and said we don't see our way to that. Your alternative is to come for a variance, and I don't think anyone should be scorned for seeking a variance when they deem that it's appropriate, and that's why we're here. All things being equal, preferred to, a year and a half ago when we started it, go through a rezoning process. It would have been a lot easier, but that was a complete dead-end street. I want to talk a little bit about the RSA on fair share. Fair share is important in workforce. This isn't a workforce project. This is an affordable. And the numbers are impressive, and it's great that the city gets awards. But the market is the best indicator of what's needed. People don't build things to have them empty. People build things when there's demand for it. And if all of that thing was great and everything was built and things get permitted and approved, they don't always get built. Why are there people here in the city that still don't have a place to live that's affordable? And there's a lot of them. When you make reference to other towns in the compact, if I told you, gee, if you looked at Manchester, they have a tremendous amount of affordable housing because they're a city and they have a lot more people that have needs, especially affordable housing needs. Plus they have sewer and water. If I said, look at Bedford or Amherst or towns like that, Brookline, and compare them to Nashua, Manchester, or Derry, because you're a city, you have people with a lot of needs. And those needs haven't been met yet. This is a project that can meet those needs. When there was discussion about that project, the industrial project and the connection to the rail spur, that never got developed, never got built. And if you think about it, since 2008, this has been zoned as industrial. And we had one of the highest demand industrial periods, and no one was interested in it, not even Wheelabrator. If they had plans to expand, or they had concerns about people next door, they had every opportunity to pursue this property and put it under agreement and hold it or protect it. And the market spoke. They didn't think it was necessary. They didn't go and do it. When you look at wetlands, I think those of you that have been to planning, you know, it's not, oh, shucks, they're wetlands. Planning boards and conservation commissions are very sensitive about the development of wetlands. And even though there's discussion we want to preserve it for industrial, why? And you have acreage that's bigger than Manchester? Well, there may be land now that's zoned commercial or office. There's not a demand for office. Maybe in 2030 when they get out there, and maybe if there's a little demand, they rezone some other pieces and say, hey, this is office, let's zone it to industrial. They're not limited just by what's zoned industrial now, and they can change that in future if there's so much available land. The other thing with the master plan and consistency with the master plan, I think Concord next, and I wasn't involved in that, but Kevin could speak to it. There definitely was a reception to change the zoning and take a look at it. And that's was Kevin's comment, correct me if I'm wrong, with respect to that. The other thing, you look at 600 houses or 600 units over at the mall, that's a pretty recent approval. Came to this board, it was an allowed use, but it wasn't consistent with the master plan. Your minutes say there was an objector here saying you shouldn't approve this many houses because it's not consistent with the master plan. That wasn't a concern. You saw fit in that particular case to grant a number of dimensional variances to allow that to go forward. You're looking at industrial. Who's going to build industrial if it costs you more to build it that you can ever get in rent or sale? just not viable. The other thing, as far as the connection to the rail, it's very complex, very difficult to get to. So it's late, and as everyone said, I think we made our piece. Is there some points that you wanted to?
No, I'm just, we're in a housing crisis, not an industrial crisis. If we're in an industrial crisis later in the future, we can rezone land at that point. But right now, it's housing, and I think we need to do the right thing. So that's all I have to add. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any other comments from code enforcement? Good. Go.
You don't want to get into a rebuttal situation.
No, and I don't want you to. If there's something you want to clarify, that's
I
fine.
think just factually, two things. One, the mall project came to the zoning board for dimensional variances for parking things. It wasn't a use variance. Residential is allowed in the Gateway Performance District, so it's not quite apt. So that's number one. The second one I would note is the city council, as part of its goals that it sets for the biennium, which is the 24-25 period, has a goal that was to stop Concord Next, to do some interim zoning amendments to correct some of the things that drive you folks nuts that you see repeated variances on, parking, signage, maybe dimensional variances, things like that. But said we are not going to do any broad zoning changes until we complete a new master plan. And then we'll go back to whatever it's going to be. It won't be called Concord Next, but it'll be a new zoning initiative that will be based on a new master plan. So I thought that those two pieces of factual information would be helpful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
With that, we'll declare the public testimony portion of the hearing closed. I won't summarize the case. What I will do is ask Mr. Winters to start the discussion.
Oh, great.
Well, you were dozing off over there. I thought it was important to get you back on track. How do you see this?
You know, this is, I mean, I think the fact that Mr. Walsh has come and, you know, presented is, that's not that common. I mean, so obviously the city, you know, by the fact of his position and his longstanding experience with the city, just the fact that he's here and he's spoken at length on this, you know, adds a certain element to this, which maybe isn't technically relevant, but obviously the city is taking a very strong position. I don't know if it's the most adamant position we've ever seen them take. I mean, they, you know, it could, it could be, which isn't a criticism. I mean, that's probably a good thing. But it doesn't technically change how we, you know, the standards by which we review it, but it adds a dimension, no pun intended. The easiest case I can make for the applicant, I'm kind of thinking, I'll try to make good cases on both sides for a second. The easiest case for the applicant is, well, by definition, almost, a use variance is inconsistent with the master plan. We don't hear it. We hear references to the master plan, but we don't hear a ton of such pointed arguments regarding the master plan. And we very often grant variances if we're convinced that the zoned use of the land makes it implausible for development. And that's a very common reason why we grant variances. And it's actually a relatively modest number of units. And conversely, I can't think of a specific example, but we have, I believe we have occasionally granted variances for industrial use in residential zones when we thought it was appropriate, or when we thought there was no good residential use there. So that's the whole idea of a variance. I think, you know, on the other side of it is the city, obviously, and therefore the public has a strong interest in protecting the master plan, and they view the industrial use is extremely important, and then reserving this land for potential industrial use, including tying into the rails, which, you know, some of this gets into sort of projecting, like Mr. Schweiker trying to project the future. But I would think if that's going to be such a huge payoff, then the Lacasse team would just, hey, we'll just buy and hold the land until this railway, and then we can make a killing just off of the increase in the value of the land when finally society sees how important this rail line is. If a developer really was so convinced, a lot of people have ideas about things, but it's usually the people who are putting their money on it that are making the best bet. And in the backdrop of all that is, not to belabor it, obviously there's an extreme housing crisis. The vacancy rate is really low. I understand that there's a lot coming online, but will we actually see it make a dent in the vacancy rate when it all pans through? Because remember, household sizes are going down, so we need a certain number of units just to keep pace with the natural demographic, and we also lose some housing stock over time. So a certain number of units need to come online just to keep us even. So I know it's kind of a bit of a scattershot of thoughts, but that's just my general impression.
Mark.
I thought that real estate research and the industrial need was very interesting. I didn't know any of that. That was really, really neat. It's pretty clear it's not balanced, the zoning balance. The master plan and zoning Concord Next, it's pretty clear that's been a pretty murky situation. I was in 4th grade when the master plan was written. 2008, that's also the recession, so like nobody my age has known a fair housing market in their adult life. So you don't have to tell me there's a housing crisis. I honestly don't see a problem with residential at this site, is my point. And I think we had that, the Scottish Society last month came, and it was kind of the reverse. It was kind of, the use variance was for the opposite. It was for the office space and the bagpipe lessons in the residential zone. But like they had demonstrated like such and such residential had been proposed and it just wasn't going to work out for that site. I wasn't hearing much about this particular site, this parcel not necessarily working for industrial. So I think ultimately it's just blatantly in the industrial zone.
You all set?
Yes, sorry.
Mr. Wilder, what do you think?
I'm in a real quandary on this. There's been so many valid points presented by both sides. Yes, we have very little industrial land. Yes, we have over 2,300 new units that have been built, proposed, in the works. Yes, we have approximately, 505 of those are affordable housing. I'm also persuaded that we still need more affordable housing. I see this idle property that's been idle for a long time. In the past, we've dealt with idle properties by granting variances. Those are my short points.
Inspector Morgan.
It's a surprisingly close one for me too, because I'm almost always a no on a use variance.
That has come to my attention.
Yes. But I recognize we need more housing. Like at this point, I don't think we can have too much housing. But I don't think we need it here. I recognize that this property has not been developed with an industrial use. I don't think that means it cannot or will not be developed with industrial uses just because that demand is not there right now. And I'm going to go ahead and go through the variance criteria, and I hope you will take them down because eventually they will become my motion. I think that granting this variance would be contrary to the public interest because it would unduly and in a marked degree conflict with the ordinance, putting residential uses directly abutting existing industrial use and in an area that is zoned for industrial use is going to conflict with that existing industrial use, no matter how much those people are told you're next to an industrial use. And I think when future industrial uses come in for approval, those residential residents are going to show up at these public hearings and object to additional industrial uses, even though they're in an industrial zone. So I think it alters the essential character of the neighborhood that is there and that potentially will be there. And this idea that right now it's a self-contained piece of property, well, just because it's currently not developed doesn't mean it's not going to be developed or should not be developed with other industrial uses. I think there is a gain to the general public from denying the variance because the industrially zoned property is preserved for future industrial use, and that is consistent with the master plan, and that is consistent with the city's goals and good planning for the development of the city. I am convinced that granting the variance would not diminish surrounding property values. I was convinced by the testimony that this would not diminish the value of the surrounding industrial properties. But I'm not convinced there are special conditions of the property that distinguish it from other industrially zoned properties that make it uniquely burdened by its industrial zoning. I recognize the wetlands, I recognize the lack of frontage, but there's lots of properties in Concord that don't have frontage, that have wetlands. And I think this property does have some characteristics that are good for industrial properties, including the proximity to Route 4 and the immediate proximity to 93. And I have no idea whether or not this connection to the rail is feasible, but we have at least one plan showing it, and I find it hard to believe that means it's impossible. So for me, I would make a motion to deny the variance for those reasons.
Hold that thought.
I will.
I think the appellant made an extremely strong case for a variance. And similar arguments have prevailed in the past with the zoning board. However, in almost all of the cases I can think of, we were dealing with something anomalous. There was a small piece of the puzzle that didn't fit with the larger master plan, which was causing an unnecessary hardship on the owner of the property or the prospective owner of the property. It has always been a principle with me, and I think with my fellow board members, that it's not our job to change the zoning. It's our job to repair little bits and pieces that fall off the wagon because they weren't put on quite right. In this case, we really would be changing the zoning because I agree with Ms. Spector-Morgan and others who have said that once you put that development there, that's the direction that neighborhood is going to go. And it is clearly not what the master plan contemplates. It's possible that the master plan is in error, but it is not our job to correct the error in this case. That is the job of city council and the planning board, and or an appellant who goes to the city council and makes an argument for changing the zoning. So even though I respect the argument that was made and I admire the thoroughness and skill with which it was made, I would be inclined to support a motion to deny.
So I would make that motion for the reasons I articulated.
Is there a second? Nobody wants a second?
Okay.
Nope. Okay, fails for lack of a second. Is there anyone who wishes to make another motion?
I'll say that I understand the argument or the case that there could be an industrial use here. It's part of the master plan, but I think it's unreasonable to a landowner to say that they have to wait to develop their land for some uncertain period of time when doesn't really seem heavily disputed that there's no current potential industrial use. So I think that, I'm convinced by the fact that they really have no alternative way to develop this land. And I understand the importance to the city of maintaining industrial, but I think that's outweighed by the landowner's right to be able to use their land for some function, and also the public's interest in developing further housing. So for those reasons, I would move to approve the use variance. I think they're going to have a long road to hoe here. There's a lot of other things they're going to have to get through, but I think the criteria have been met, and I would adopt the applicant's proposed findings.
Is there a second?
We have to vote one way or
We
the
have
other,
to-
guys.
we gotta do something here, people.
We're getting multiple abstentions.
So we have a motion to approve, we have a motion to deny, and we have dead silence from the rest of us here.
Mark and Nick, what are you thinking?
I'll second it for the sake of this further discussion, if there is any.
Okay, you're going to second the motion to approve.
Yes.
Correct? Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Mark, how do you see it?
I could see it either way. I really can see it both ways.
That's why we get the big
I
bucks to
know,
make those hard
I know.
decisions.
Like, what if it is another 5 years? Like, I don't know.
Is that really relevant?
No, because we're not the master plan subcommittee.
Right.
So, no. To deny. I'm inclined to deny.
Okay. Would you like to make a motion to that effect?
Well, there's a motion on the floor.
Oh, right. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Let's
I
take a
will
vote.
Second Ms. Spector-Morgan's.
Well, you can't do that yet.
No.
You can't do that yet. Okay, we'll call for a vote on the motion to grant. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Nay? Did you say nay?
Can we
Mark?
do
Yes.
a roll call on that?
Yes, the roll call was in favor.
Wallner,
Mr. Wallner, in opposition? Me?
Opposed.
in opposition, Morgan, Davy, Spector, Morgan, Davy, and Carly.
Yes. And in favor, Witters.
Oh, yeah, right.
Okay, so the motion fails.
So I will remake my motion.
Is there a second?
Yes.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
The roll call is the same in reverse. The motion is denied. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes of last month's meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I abstain, I was not here.
Is there any other business to come before us?
There is not.
Move to adjourn.
And there's a second and aye.
Second.